close your eyes and imagine the sky, not the gentle blue expanse you know, but a vast and endless promise. Imagine wings strapped to your back, lifting you into that expanse, and the air rushing past your face. Now imagine the heat of the sun on your skin, so close it feels alive, and the icy pull of the ocean far below. Between these two forces, your fate hangs in the balance. This is the story of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. It begins not in the skies but in shadows, in the winding labyrinthine halls of Crete. This is a tale of ambition and tragedy, of brilliance and folly, and like all great stories, it begins with a choice. Long before Icarus soared to the heavens, his father Daedalus was a man of unmatched brilliance, a craftsman whose hands could shape wood and stone into wonders. King Minos of Crete, both awed and threatened by Daedalus's genius, kept him close, like a prized possession. But genius is a dangerous thing to cage. When Daedalus built the great labyrinth to house the Minotaur, he thought himself a free man. The labyrinth was a marvel of design, its twisting corridors so intricate that even the Minotaur could not escape its confines. But Daedalus's brilliance became his undoing. He knew too much. King Minos, fearful that Daedalus might reveal the labyrinth's secrets, imprisoned him and his son in a high tower overlooking the sea. And so began their exile. For years the tower was their world, a lonely prison of stone, the ocean their jailer. The only sounds were the crash of waves against the cliffs and the distant cries of seabirds. Icarus, young and restless, would spend hours watching the birds wheel through the air, his heart aching with longing. "Father," he would ask again and again, "why do the birds get to fly while we are trapped here? Why can't we escape?" Daedalus, ever cautious, would answer, "Because the sky belongs to the gods, my son. To defy them is to invite ruin." But Icarus did not fear ruin. To him the sky was not a domain of the gods, but a promise of freedom, of adventure, of something greater than the prison they called home. One day, as Daedalus gazed out at the horizon, he began to dream of escape. He studied the birds that circled their tower, watching how they caught the wind and soared effortlessly above the sea. An idea began to form, a plan as daring as it was dangerous. Daedalus worked in secret, gathering feathers from the birds that nested on the cliffs. He bound them together with wax and string, shaping 2 sets of wings. It was an impossible undertaking, but Daedalus was no ordinary man. He poured all his skill, all his hope, into the wings, knowing they were his only chance. Weeks turned into months. By the time the wings were complete, they were as much a work of art as they were a tool of escape. When he showed them to Icarus, the boy's eyes lit up with wonder. "Are they for us?" Icarus asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Daedalus nodded. "With these we can leave this place. But you must listen to me, Icarus. The wings are fragile. Fly too low, and the sea's dampness will drag you down. Fly too high, and the sun's heat will melt the wax. You must follow my path exactly. Promise me," Icarus promised, though his mind was already soaring beyond his father's words. To him the wings were more than a means of escape. They were a key to the sky, to freedom, to glory. The morning of their escape was clear and bright. The sun rose like a golden flame, casting long shadows over the sea. Daedalus secured the wings to his son's back, his hands steady but his heart heavy. He looked into Icarus's eyes, seeing not just excitement but something deeper, something dangerous. "Remember what I told you," Daedalus said, his voice firm. Icarus nodded, though his gaze was fixed on the sky, and then they leapt. At first there was only the rush of wind and the dizzying sensation of flight. The wings caught the air, lifting them higher and higher, away from the tower that had been their prison. Daedalus flew ahead, his movements careful and measured. He glanced back to see Icarus following, his face alight with joy. For a while they flew together, their wings cutting through the air like blades. The sea stretched endlessly below, a shimmering mirror that seemed to mock their newfound freedom. But to Icarus, the world had never felt so alive. "Father," he called, his voice carried by the wind. "Look at us, we're flying." Daedalus smiled, but his heart was heavy with worry. "Stay close, my son," he shouted back, "not too high." But Icarus was not listening. How could he, when the sky was calling him? The higher he climbed, the more alive he felt. The sun burned brighter above him, its golden light a siren song. How could he resist its pull? He soared higher, his laughter echoing across the sky. Below him, Daedalus shouted, his voice laced with panic. "Icarus, no! Come back!" But the boy's heart was full of the sky, his mind drunk with the thrill of flight. He climbed higher still, his wings cutting through the thin air. The sun's heat grew fierce, but Icarus did not notice, not until the first feather came loose. It drifted away, spinning lazily downward. Then another and another. Icarus faltered, his laughter turning to panic. He flapped his arms desperately, but it was no use. The wax that bound his wings was melting, dripping away in golden drops. "Father," he cried, his voice breaking. "Father, help me." But Daedalus was too far below, his shouts drowned by the rush of the wind. For a moment Icarus hung suspended between sky and sea, his body a silhouette against the blazing sun. And then he fell. He plummeted like a comet, his wings unraveling, his arms flailing against the air. The sea rushed up to meet him, its surface glittering like broken glass. Daedalus could only watch, helpless, as his son disappeared beneath the waves. "Icarus," he whispered, his voice choked with grief. The waters closed over Icarus, swallowing him whole. Some say Icarus's story is a warning, a lesson about hubris and the dangers of ambition. They say he was foolish, reckless, blinded by his own desire. But others see something more, for in those fleeting moments before the fall, Icarus achieved something extraordinary. He soared higher than anyone had dared, tasted the sky, and felt the warmth of the sun on his face. Perhaps the true tragedy is not that he fell, but that his story is so often told as a failure, because in his brief flight, Icarus lived more fully than most do in a lifetime. This is the story of Sisyphus, a man too clever for the gods, a man who defied death itself, a man condemned for eternity, cursed not by fire or torment, but by something far worse, futility. Sisyphus was a king, not a noble king, not a just king, but a cunning one, a man of wit and trickery, whose greatest love was not power or wealth, but the thrill of deception. He ruled Corinth, a city of splendor, a city that flourished under his hand, but he ruled not with honor nor with justice. His strength lay in his mind, and his mind was always seeking new ways to cheat, to lie, to twist fate to his advantage. He deceived men, he betrayed his allies, and then he dared to deceive the gods themselves, and for that they would never forgive him. The first time Sisyphus cheated death, it was with words. One day, as he stood upon the cliffs of his kingdom, he witnessed something unusual. A great eagle, its wings vast as the sky, carrying off a young maiden. He knew at once what he had seen. Zeus, the king of the gods, had stolen another mortal woman, as was his nature, and yet, for the first time, there was a witness, a bargaining chip. Not long after, the river god Oedipus came searching for his lost daughter, frantic and desperate. Sisyphus smiled. He saw opportunity. "I know where she is," he told the god, "but knowledge comes at a price." And so a deal was struck. In exchange for revealing Zeus's crime, Oedipus would grant Sisyphus the gift of water, a great river to bring life to his kingdom. A simple exchange, but to betray a god, that is never simple. Zeus discovered the treachery, and though the sky rumbled with his fury, he did not strike Sisyphus down, not yet. Death would come for him soon enough. And so Thanatos, the god of death, was sent to fetch Sisyphus and drag him to the underworld. But Sisyphus was waiting. With words as smooth as polished stone, he welcomed Thanatos into his palace, offered him wine, spoke to him as a guest rather than a captor. And as they drank, Sisyphus listened. He listened to the god speak of his chains, of how he bound the souls of the dead and led them to their final rest. And then, with a movement as quick as thought, Sisyphus turned the tables. With the very chains meant to bind him, he seized Thanatos instead. He locked him in iron and left him there, trapped, helpless. And in doing so, he did something no mortal had ever done before. He stopped death itself. For a time, no one died. Warriors struck each other down in battle, only to rise again. The sick and the old lingered, unable to pass. Even Hades, lord of the underworld, found his realm empty, silent, as souls were denied their rightful place. The balance of life and death had been broken, and the gods could not allow it. Zeus sent Ares, god of war, to free Thanatos, and when death was unchained, he came for Sisyphus with vengeance in his grip. Dragged to the underworld at last, Sisyphus stood before Hades, but even in death he had one last trick to play. He had foreseen this moment, he had planned for it. Before his capture, he had given his wife strict instructions. Do not bury my body, do not perform the rites, do not honor my passing. And so, when he arrived in the land of the dead, he stood before Persephone, queen of the underworld, and pleaded his case. My lady, he said, I have been robbed of my proper funeral. My soul cannot rest, for my wife has failed to honor me. Let me return just for a moment to correct this insult. I will return to you willingly. Persephone, kind and just, took pity on him, and so Sisyphus was allowed to walk free, back to the living, back to the sun, the wind, the laughter of his people, and he did not return. For years he lived again, a man who had conquered death itself. He ruled, he schemed, he thrived, but no one escapes the gods forever. Thanatos came again. This time there were no words, no chains, no clever tricks. Sisyphus was dragged, kicking and screaming, to the underworld once more, and this time there would be no escape. The gods do not take kindly to those who mock them. For his defiance, for his arrogance, Sisyphus was condemned, not to fire, not to torment, but to something far worse. A task, a simple task, to roll a great stone up a hill, to push with all his strength, all his will, until he reached the top, and just as he neared the peak, the stone would slip and roll back down, again and again and again, for eternity. Some say his punishment was the cruelest of all, not because of pain, but because of its meaninglessness, because it offered no triumph, no ending, no goal. It was struggle, without purpose, effort, without reward, and yet there are those who see Sisyphus differently, not as a victim, but as a symbol, because though the stone fell, he always went back. Though the task was endless, he never stopped pushing. Though the gods had stripped him of hope, he still climbed. And perhaps that is the lesson, that even in the face of futility, even when the world is senseless, we must find meaning. We must endure. We must push forward, because to give up, to surrender, that is the only true failure. If you're enjoying the story so far, please consider liking and subscribing before you drift asleep. Before men walked the earth, before the gods ruled from Olympus, there was chaos, and from chaos came the Titans, ancient beings of immense power, older than the gods themselves. Among them was Prometheus. His name meant forethought, for he could see what others could not. He was not the strongest of his kind, nor the most feared, but he was the cleverest, and he loved mankind. Not the gods with their golden thrones and their hunger for worship, but the frail, struggling creatures below, the humans weak and shivering in the dark, doomed to short, brutal lives. He saw their suffering, and he pitied them. The gods did not. Zeus, the king of Olympus, ruled with an iron hand. He had overthrown the Titans and cast them down, taking the heavens as his prize. He saw mortals as nothing more than playthings, pawns to serve, to suffer, and to die. And yet Prometheus did not bow to him. Instead, he watched, he planned, and in time he found a way to give mankind the gift that the gods had hoarded for themselves, the gift of fire. Prometheus knew the risk. Zeus had forbidden fire to mortals, believing that without it, they would remain weak, dependent, easy to control. But Prometheus did not care. He saw what fire could be, not just warmth and light, but creation, civilization, power. One night, while the gods feasted in their golden halls, Prometheus crept to Olympus. He moved like a shadow, unseen, unheard, past the watchful eyes of divine sentries. In the great halls of the gods burned the sacred fire, eternal, untouchable. With a single movement, Prometheus reached into the flame. It did not burn him. Instead, it danced along his fingers, as if recognizing him, as if knowing what he intended. He concealed the ember within a hollow reed and fled, descending from the heights of Olympus to the world below. And then He gave fire to man. For the first time, the cold fled before the heat of flame. The darkness was pushed back, no longer absolute. Man, who had huddled in caves and feared the night, now wielded the very power of the gods. With fire they cooked their food, shaping raw meat into nourishment. They forged tools, bending metal to their will. They gathered around flames, telling stories, dreaming, building. And Zeus saw, the great god seated on his throne of storm clouds, beheld the fires burning across the earth, and his rage shook the heavens. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled like the voice of doom itself. The mountain of Olympus trembled. Zeus had been defied, and Zeus did not forgive. The gods do not suffer betrayal lightly. Zeus, his fury like a storm unchained, called forth his counsel. He spoke not of justice, but of vengeance. Prometheus had dared to give fire to man, had dared to share a power meant only for the divine. For that, he would suffer. The god Hephaestus, master of the forge, was ordered to craft chains, unbreakable, forged from divine fire and celestial iron. The twin gods of force, Kratos and Bia, were summoned to carry out the sentence, and so the hunt began. Prometheus knew they would come. He could see the future after all. He could have fled. He could have hidden himself among the stars beyond Zeus's reach, but he did not. Instead, he stood atop the highest peak of the Caucasus Mountains, waiting for the gods to arrive. And they did. Kratos and Bia, their forms wreathed in godly might, seized him, their grip like iron. Hephaestus, reluctant but obedient, took the chains and bound Prometheus to the rock. The Titan did not struggle, he did not beg, but Zeus was not finished. The punishment had only begun. Each day, as the sun rose over the peaks, a great shadow fell over Prometheus, a bird, a monstrous eagle, its wings blotting out the sky, sent by Zeus himself. It descended upon him, its talons tearing into flesh, its beak rending muscle, and then it feasted. It tore into his body, devouring his liver, swallowing it whole. Prometheus, bound and helpless, could do nothing but endure. His body burned, his vision swam, but he did not scream. Night would come, and with it, relief. The wounds would heal, his body restored. But with dawn, the torment would begin anew. Every day the eagle came. Every day it fed. Every day Prometheus endured. Years passed, decades, centuries. Gods came and went, their thrones shifting, their wars raging. Empires of man rose and fell, their cities built with the fire he had given them. And still Prometheus remained. He did not beg for mercy. He did not break. Zeus had sought to teach him suffering, but Prometheus already knew what Zeus did not. He had seen the future. He knew that the gods themselves were not eternal, that one day their rule would end. He knew that time was on his side. And then, after an age of torment, a new voice came to the mountain. Heracles, a mortal-born god, a hero of men. He had come not for Prometheus, but for his own trials. Yet when he saw the Titan bound in torment, when he saw the eagle circling for its daily feast, he knew what must be done. With a single arrow, Heracles struck. The eagle fell, its monstrous body crashing into the rocks below. Then he shattered the chains that had held Prometheus for an eternity. The Titan fell to his knees, his body weak but his spirit unbroken. He looked up at Heracles, the son of Zeus himself, and nodded. The prophecy had come true. The gods would not rule forever. Their grip would weaken, their power wane. The age of man was rising, and it had all begun with a single, stolen flame. The gods are not kind. They are not just. They do not give without taking. They are powerful, yes, mighty beyond mortal comprehension, but they are also vain, jealous, and vengeful, and nothing awakens their wrath like defiance. And so, when Prometheus stole fire from Olympus and gifted it to mankind, Zeus, king of the gods, was furious. The fire had given men power, power to shape, to build, to survive. Zeus had wanted them weak, reliant, at his mercy. And so he plotted his revenge. Prometheus had given man a gift. Zeus would give them one too, but his gift would not be salvation, it would be their undoing. With divine hands, Hephaestus, god of the forge, sculpted her, Pandora, the first woman, a being of such beauty that the gods themselves marveled at her. Her skin was smooth as polished marble, her eyes bright as the morning star. She was flawless, radiant, breathtaking, but she was not made to be loved. She was made to be a curse. Each god bestowed upon her a trait. Athena gave her wisdom, Aphrodite beauty, Hermes cunning. But Zeus, in his cruelty, gave her curiosity, a hunger to know, and then, with a smile as cold as the wind that howls through the void, Zeus sent her to earth. She was given to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a gift, a wife, a blessing it seemed, but Prometheus had warned his brother, never accept gifts from Zeus. Epimetheus, though, was not his brother. He did not see the trap woven into Pandora's very being. He did not question her presence. He did not wonder why the gods, who had never given without taking, would now offer such beauty freely. And so Pandora lived among men, golden and perfect, a queen among mortals. But with her she brought a single object, a box. It was small, unassuming, sealed tight, bound with sacred cords. A gift from the gods, she was told, a dowry of sorts, but under no circumstances was she to open it. The warning burned in her mind. The box was forbidden. It was not hers to open. And yet, something whispered to her. Day after day she would pass by the box, her fingers itching to touch it. When she slept, she dreamed of it. When she woke, her thoughts drifted to it. What could be inside? Why would the gods give her something and tell her never to look within? It was a test, she reasoned, surely, a test of her wisdom, of her obedience. But the hunger to know was stronger. And so, one night, under a sky full of silent stars, Pandora reached for the box. Her hands trembled as she touched the lid. Her breath was quick, shallow. One look, that was all. One look, and then she would close it. The lid lifted, and the world shattered. The air turned black. A wind unlike any other burst forth, howling with 1,000 voices. The room filled with writhing, twisting shadows, clawing, grasping, screaming. From the box they came, plague, slithering forth to rot flesh and twist bones. War with burning eyes and a sword that dripped with blood. Famine, gaunt and grinning, devouring all in its path. Pain, sickness, betrayal, suffering. They swarmed the world, infecting everything they touched. No longer would mankind be free of torment. No longer would they walk unburdened, untouched by fear and death. Pandora stumbled back, her hands pressed to her ears, but it was too late. The horrors had already been unleashed. She had doomed them all. And then, through the chaos, she heard something else, a single sound, a voice, soft, trembling, trapped. From within the box, something remained, something small, something fragile, hope. Pandora gasped. She lunged for the box, slamming the lid shut before anything else could escape. And in the sudden silence she heard it again. The voice, faint, but there. She had unleashed every horror upon the world, but she had also left one thing behind, hope. And so the world was changed. No longer did men live free of suffering. Pain, war, disease, all these things became part of their lives. They learned to fear, to mourn, to suffer. But they also learned something else. They learned to endure. Because at the bottom of the box, beneath all the horrors Zeus had unleashed, there remained one final gift, a whisper in the dark, a light in the storm, hope. There are those who say Pandora's curiosity was a curse, that she is to blame for all the suffering in the world, that had she only resisted, mankind would have remained untouched by misery. But others see it differently, for what is life without struggle, without loss, without the knowledge that we can fall and still rise again? Would we know the value of joy if we had never known sorrow? Would we cherish love if we had never known grief? Perhaps Zeus thought he was punishing mankind. Perhaps he believed he was breaking them. But in the end, all he did was make them stronger. For the horrors of the world are great, but hope is greater. Hope is the ember that refuses to die, the fire that flickers even in the coldest night. It is the one thing the gods could not take away. Deep beneath the island of Crete, In the darkness of a twisted labyrinth, something waits. A creature born of rage and ruin, a beast neither man nor god, neither animal nor mortal. A monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull. It walks the endless corridors of its prison, its breath heavy, its hunger endless. It does not know love. It does not know mercy. It knows only the hunt. And once a year the people of Athens send it a sacrifice. 7 sons, 7 daughters. They enter the labyrinth. They do not return. But this year, one man refuses to kneel. One man will step forward, not as a victim, but as a hunter. This is the story of Theseus, and the day he walked into the labyrinth and faced the Minotaur. Before the labyrinth, before the terror, there was a king. His name was Minos, ruler of Crete, favored by the gods. But the gods, as always, are not kind. Poseidon, lord of the sea, had given Minos a gift, a white bull, more beautiful than any beast that had ever lived. It was to be sacrificed in honor of the god. But Minos, greedy and proud, kept the bull for himself, and so Poseidon cursed him. He cursed Minos' wife, Persephone, to fall in love with the bull, and from that unholy union a child was born, a creature of shame, a horror that could not be named, the Minotaur. Minos could not kill the creature, not because he loved it, but because it was his punishment. Instead, he ordered Daedalus, the greatest craftsman of his age, to build a prison, a labyrinth so vast, so twisted, that once inside, no man could find his way out. And so, the Minotaur was cast into the darkness. But a beast cannot live without food, and Minos would not starve his burden. Instead, he demanded a tribute. Every year, 7 sons and 7 daughters of Athens would be sent to Crete. 14 young souls, 14 lives given to the beast. This was the price of peace. This was the law of Minos, until Theseus arrived. Theseus, prince of Athens, son of King Aegeus, a warrior, a leader, a man with fire in his heart and steel in his veins. When he heard of the tribute, he did not weep. He did not plead. He stepped forward and said, enough. He would go to Crete, not as a sacrifice, but as an executioner. He would enter the labyrinth, and he would slay the Minotaur. The black-sailed ship carried Theseus and the chosen youths across the sea. Upon arrival, they were led before Minos, who looked upon Theseus and laughed. You are brave, the king said, but bravery will not help you in the labyrinth. Minos' daughter Ariadne watched in silence. She had seen the tributes before. She had seen their fear. But Theseus did not fear, and something stirred within her. That night she came to him in secret. I can help you, she whispered. I can show you how to escape. She placed a spool of thread in his hands. Unravel this as you go. Follow it back when the beast is dead. Theseus held her gaze. Why help me? He asked. Ariadne did not answer, because she did not know. All she knew was that she could not watch another innocent die. Not this time. Not him. The doors to the labyrinth creaked open. Theseus stepped inside. The moment the doors shut behind him, the world changed. Silence. Darkness. The walls stretched endlessly in every direction. There was no pattern, no escape, a prison of madness, and somewhere in the shadows, the Minotaur waited. Step by step, Theseus unraveled the thread. He moved through the corridors, his sword gleaming in the dim light. The air smelled of dust and decay. The stones beneath his feet were slick with something he did not want to name. And then, a sound, heavy, slow, breathing. The beast was near. Theseus followed the sound, not running, not hiding, hunting. Until at last he saw it. It stood at the end of the corridor, half in shadow, massive. Its chest rose and fell, its nostrils flaring. The horns on its head gleamed like ivory, and then it moved. A low growl rumbled from its throat. It had found its prey, and Theseus raised his sword. The Minotaur lunged, faster than any beast of its size should be. Theseus barely rolled aside as the monster's horns shattered the stone where he had stood. Again the beast struck. A fist like a boulder crashed into Theseus's side, sending him sprawling. Pain. Dust. The world spun. The Minotaur charged, but Theseus was ready. At the last second, he twisted aside, his sword flashing. The blade met flesh. A roar of pain shook the labyrinth, but the beast did not fall. It turned, snarling, bleeding, angrier than before. The battle raged, stone crumbled, blood stained the floor. Theseus fought with everything he had. He was fast, he was strong, but the Minotaur was stronger, and it was never tired, until a mistake. The Minotaur struck too hard, its strength betraying it. Its horn lodged into the stone wall, and in that moment Theseus saw his chance. He leapt onto the beast's back. His hands found its horn, yanking its head back, and then, with a final cry, he drove his sword into the Minotaur's throat. The beast let out one last breath, and then it was still. The Minotaur was dead. Bloodied and exhausted, Theseus followed the thread back through the labyrinth. He emerged into the light where Ariadne waited. The people of Crete stared in disbelief. The monster was gone, and the reign of terror was over. That night, Theseus and the Athenian youths fled Crete, sailing home beneath the stars. But Theseus, he had seen the darkness. He had walked through the labyrinth, and he would never be the same. The Minotaur is gone. The labyrinth is silent, but the legend remains. In the land of Phrygia, there was no ruler greater than Midas. His kingdom was vast, his coffers overflowing. Gold adorned his halls, his garments, his very crown. Merchants from distant lands whispered of his fortune. Poets sang of his splendor. And yet, for all his wealth, it was not enough. For Midas did not love gold as others did. He did not seek it to buy, to trade, or to display. No, Midas loved gold for its own sake. To him, gold was not just wealth. It was the measure of a man. It was power. It was life itself. And one day the gods decided to test just how much gold a man could truly bear. It began with a stranger, a satyr, half man, half beast, stumbled into Midas's garden one evening, drunk on wine, laughing to himself as he collapsed beneath the shade of a tree. This was no ordinary satyr. This was Silenus, the trusted companion of Dionysus, god of wine and revelry. Midas could have cast him out, could have sent his guards to rid the palace of the foolish creature. But Midas was no fool. He knew that the gods valued hospitality, and he knew that pleasing a god could bring great rewards. So he welcomed the satyr, fed him, entertained him, treated him not as a vagrant, but as a guest of honor. And when Dionysus came searching for his lost companion, Midas presented Silenus unharmed. The god, pleased by the king's generosity, offered Midas a gift. "Name your heart's desire," Dionysus said, "and it shall be yours." Midas did not hesitate. "Let everything I touch turn to gold." The god frowned. "Are you certain?" Midas smiled. What greater blessing could there be? And so, with a wave of his hand, Dionysus granted the wish. The golden touch was now his. Midas could hardly wait to test his power. He reached for a stone. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, it shimmered, hardened, and transformed into solid gold. He laughed, a deep, joyous sound, the laughter of a man who held the power of the gods themselves. A branch, gold. A goblet, gold. The very floor he walked upon gleamed beneath his steps, turning to gold as he passed. He strode through his palace, trailing wealth behind him. His servants watched in awe, whispering prayers as they beheld their king, now more god than man. And yet, something was wrong. It was not until he sat for a feast that Midas understood his folly. A grape turned to gold in his hand. A sip of wine became molten metal upon his tongue. The bread he lifted to his lips was hard, lifeless, inedible. The food before him was abundant, but it might as well have been stone. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, thirst burned his throat, and yet, for all his wealth, he could not take a single bite. But the true horror was yet to come. His daughter, his joy, his pride, the light of his life. She ran to him as she always did, her laughter like music, her arms outstretched, and without thinking he embraced her. In an instant she was gone, not gone, changed, her warm skin, her soft hair, the life in her eyes, all of it was frozen, hardened, turned to unfeeling gold. She stood before him, a perfect golden statue. She would never laugh again, never run, never speak. Midas had turned the one thing he loved more than gold into nothing more than treasure, and for the first time in his life he wished for less. He tore at his robes, he screamed to the heavens, "This is not a gift, this is a curse!" The very walls of his palace, now gleaming with his touch, seemed to mock him. Gold was everywhere, and yet he had never felt so poor. With shaking hands he lifted his daughter's golden face, pressed his lips to her cold forehead, and he wept. Midas fled to the temple of Dionysus. He did not come as a king, he came as a beggar. He fell to his knees before the god, his voice breaking with desperation. "Take it back," he pleaded, "take it all back." Dionysus, in his mercy, listened. He told Midas of a river, a sacred stream where the magic could be washed away. Midas did not hesitate. He ran from his palace, from his kingdom, from his golden halls. He waded into the river's cool embrace, sinking to his knees, letting the water cleanse him. The gold fled from his skin, the weight lifted from his soul. When he returned home, he rushed to his daughter, his heart pounding, and when he touched her, just the smallest, gentlest touch, her golden skin softened. Color returned to her cheeks, her lips parted, and she gasped. She was alive, and at last Midas understood. Gold could not feed him. Gold could not quench his thirst. Gold could not bring back a child's laughter, nor the warmth of an embrace. And so Midas turned away from his treasures. He cast aside his wealth, his greed, and walked into the fields, where the earth was rich, where the grain swayed in the wind, where life was simple and full. He had learned, as all men must, that true wealth is not counted in gold, but in love, in life, in the things that cannot be held, only cherished. And so, when you hear the name of Midas, you may think of his touch, his power, his golden halls. But remember this, a man can have everything and yet have nothing at all. For what is treasure if it costs you the world? What is gold if it robs you of what truly matters? And what is a wish if it cannot be undone? This is the tale of a man who ran from fate, and in doing so ran straight into its hands. A prophecy spoken before his birth, a curse that could not be undone, a truth that would drive him to ruin. This is the tragedy of Oedipus, the king who became a monster in his own eyes, and the man who learned that no one can escape fate. Long before Oedipus was a king, long before he was a man, he was a prophecy. In the city of Thebes, King Laius and Queen Jocasta longed for a child, and at last the gods gave them a son. But with his birth came a terrible warning. The oracle at Delphi, voice of Apollo, spoke these words: "This child will grow to kill his father, and he will take his own mother as his wife." Laius staggered, Jocasta wept. The boy, their son, was cursed before he had even breathed his first breath, and so the king made a terrible choice. A father is meant to protect his child, but Laius saw only his own death in the boy's eyes, and so he ordered his newborn son to be taken away. A servant carried the infant to the highest mountains, where no soul would find him. But death by sword was too merciful. Instead, the king commanded, "Nail his ankles together, leave him to die." The servant obeyed. The baby's feet were pierced, his flesh bound, his cries lost in the wind. But the gods were watching, and fate was already at work, for the child did not die. A wandering shepherd found him, took pity on the wailing babe, and carried him far away, to the land of Corinth, to a new kingdom, to a new father and mother, and the child, though marked by his wounds, grew strong, unknowing, unaware, and the name given to him was Oedipus, the swollen-footed one. The years passed. Oedipus grew into a man of strength and wisdom. The people of Corinth whispered of his greatness. His parents, King Polybus and Queen Merope, loved him as their own, but whispers turned to rumors, and rumors turned to doubt. And so Oedipus traveled to Delphi, to the oracle, to learn the truth of his birth. But the oracle did not give him peace. It spoke only doom. You will kill your father. You will marry your mother. Oedipus staggered, horror gripping his soul. No, he loved his father. He loved his mother. He would never do such things. And so he made a choice that would seal his fate. He would never return to Corinth. He would leave his home behind. He would outrun fate itself. But fate cannot be outrun. Oedipus fled, the dust of Corinth vanishing behind him. He traveled far until he reached a narrow crossroads, a place where 3 roads met, and there in the heat of the day he encountered a man in a chariot, an old man, proud and stern, surrounded by guards. The man looked down upon him and ordered him aside, but Oedipus, weary from the road, refused to kneel. The old man struck him, and in a flash of rage Oedipus drew his sword. A struggle, a cry, blood upon the earth. When the dust cleared, the old man lay dead, his guards slaughtered, and Oedipus, his heart pounding, stepped over the bodies and walked toward Thebes, never knowing the truth, never knowing that the man he had just slain was King Laius, his father. The prophecy's first thread had been woven, but the curse was not yet complete. There is a creature that waits in silence, a creature neither god nor mortal, neither beast nor woman, yet both. A creature of riddles and ruin. She watches from the shadows of ancient roads, from the crumbling cliffs of forgotten lands. Her eyes pierce the veil between wisdom and madness. She is the Sphinx, the devourer of men, the guardian of secrets, the monster whose question could mean life or death. She was like no other being in this world. The body of a lion, strong, swift, untamed. The wings of an eagle, vast, dark, stretching wide enough to eclipse the sun. The face of a woman, beautiful, terrible, wise beyond measure. Her lips curled with knowing, her voice was smooth as silk, sharp as a blade, and when she spoke, mortals trembled, because when the Sphinx asked a question, there was only one answer, and if you did not know it, you did not leave alive. The Sphinx came to the land of Thebes like a storm that never passed. She perched upon a great rock beside the road that led into the city, her tail curling lazily, her golden eyes watching, and one by one the travelers came. Merchants, soldiers, kings, they all sought to enter Thebes, and she stopped them all. She asked them her riddle, and when they could not answer, she devoured them whole. Thebes, once a city of prosperity, became a place of fear. The roads were empty, the people whispered in terror. The Sphinx was patient, she could wait forever, but Thebes could not. They needed a savior, a hero. And one day a man arrived, a man who did not fear riddles, a man who had spent his whole life searching for answers, a man named Oedipus. Oedipus did not come to Thebes seeking glory. He did not come to slay a monster. He came because he was lost, a wanderer, an exile, a man running from a fate he did not understand. He had left his home behind. He had left behind the whispers of prophecy, the shadows of a life he did not wish to live. And so, when he came upon the road to Thebes and found the great Sphinx waiting, he did not falter. He did not run. He listened, and the Sphinx smiled. She spoke in a voice that slithered through the air like smoke, a voice that had doomed countless men before him. She said, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening?" The words hung between them. A simple question, a cruel question, a question that had never been answered. The wind stilled. The Sphinx watched, waiting, and then Oedipus smiled, because he knew, and he spoke, "Man." In the morning of life as an infant he crawls on 4 legs. In the noon of his life as a man he walks on 2. And in the evening of his life as an old man he walks with a cane, 3 legs. Silence. The Sphinx stared. For the first time she had been answered. For the first time she had lost. Her wings trembled, her tail lashed against the rock, and then, without a word, she leapt from her perch, leapt into the abyss below, and she was gone. The riddle had been solved, and with it, her purpose had ended. Thebes was free, and its people in gratitude crowned Oedipus as their king, and, as was tradition, the widowed Queen Jocasta was given to him in marriage. The final thread had been woven. The prophecy was complete, but the truth had not yet been revealed. Years passed. Oedipus ruled wisely. He and Jocasta bore children. His kingdom flourished, until the plague came, a curse upon the city, famine, disease, death in the streets, and the oracle was consulted once more. Thebes is cursed, it said, for the murderer of King Laius still lives, and until he is found, the plague will not end. Oedipus, ever the righteous king, vowed to find the killer. He sent for the prophet Tiresias, the blind seer who knew all truths, and when Tiresias arrived, he spoke the words Oedipus could not bear to hear. "You are the murderer you seek." Oedipus laughed in fury. It could not be, but doubt began to creep into his heart, and as the pieces of the past fell into place, he saw the truth, the crossroads, the old man, his wife Jocasta, who was not his wife at all, but his mother. He had killed his father, he had married his mother. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and his mind shattered. Jocasta, unable to bear the truth, took her own life. Oedipus seized a dagger, tore the brooches from Jocasta's gown, and thrust them into his eyes. Darkness, pain, punishment. He had seen too much, and now he would see nothing. A king no more, a father no more, a man no more. He wandered the earth, a beggar, a shadow of what he once was, until at last he vanished into legend, never to return. Oedipus tried to run from fate, but fate cannot be outrun, and so his story remains, a lesson, a warning, that no man, no king, no soul can escape what has already been woven. Before he was a legend, before his name became eternal, he was just a man with strength beyond any mortal, a man with a destiny too great for the world to bear. His name was Heracles, son of Zeus, yet no god would envy him, for his strength was both a gift and a curse. He did not ask for his father's divine blood. He did not ask for the hatred of Hera, queen of the gods, yet from the moment of his birth, her wrath followed him like a shadow, and it was Hera, with her unyielding rage, who condemned him to his greatest crime. One night, as Heracles lay in his home, his children asleep, his wife Megara resting beside him, the goddess struck. A madness like no other, dark and twisting, clawed its way into his mind, and when he awoke, his hands were stained red. His family gone, his wife, his children gone, not by his will, not by his choice, but by his hands. And so he knelt before the oracle of Delphi, seeking atonement, seeking punishment. What he received was both 12 impossible tasks, 12 chances to redeem himself, or to die trying. The first task, to slay the Nemean lion, no ordinary beast, no common predator. This lion was monstrous, its golden hide could not be pierced, its claws could rend metal, and its roar shook the hills of Nemea. No weapon could kill it, and so when Heracles found the lion in its cave, he cast aside his bow, his sword, his club. If weapons could not harm the beast, he would use his hands. The battle shook the earth. The lion struck with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping, its claws raking across Heracles' flesh. But the hero did not falter. He grappled the beast, wrestling it to the ground. Its strength was monstrous, but his was greater, and at last, with a final burst of power, he seized the lion's throat and crushed the life from it. From that day on, he wore its impenetrable hide as armor, a trophy of his first victory. But there were still 11 more to go. A swamp, a stench of rot and death. Here in the murky waters of Lerna lurked the Hydra, 9 heads, 1 immortal, and a deadly secret. For each head that was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. Heracles waded into the swamp, his sword gleaming. He swung, 1 head fell, and 2 more grew in its place. Again and again. It was endless. The Hydra hissed and struck, its breath a poison, its blood a venomous river that soaked the ground. Heracles' attacks were futile until he called for fire. His nephew Iolaus lit a torch, searing the wounds before new heads could emerge. One by one, they burned, until only the immortal head remained, and for that Heracles did not use fire. He took his blade, severed it, and buried it deep beneath the earth, never to rise again. Heracles' next trial was not one of strength, but of patience. The Ceryneian hind was a creature of beauty, a golden stag sacred to Artemis herself. It was swifter than any beast, faster than the wind, untouchable by mortal hands. For a year Heracles pursued it, across valleys, through rivers, over mountains, until at last, under the cloak of night, he took his bow and struck, not to kill, but to wound. And so, when Artemis herself came to him, furious, demanding he release the creature, he spoke only the truth. "I do not take it for myself," he said, "only for my penance." And so she let him go. But 9 more labors remained. From patience to fury, a beast roamed the peaks of Mount Erymanthus, a boar massive and wild, its tusks like spears, its rage unmatched. Heracles was not sent to kill it, he was sent to capture it, and so he hunted it, chasing it through snow and stone, leading it to the deep drifts where its speed could no longer save it. With bare hands he seized it, bound it, and slung it over his shoulders. And when he returned, the cowardly king Eurystheus, who had ordered these labors, hid in fear. But Heracles did not smile. There were still 8 more to go. The 5th labor. No beast to slay, no monster to fight, only filth. The Augean stables, home to thousands of immortal cattle, untouched by shovel or broom for decades. A kingdom of filth, of rot, of waste. Heracles did not grab a shovel. Instead, he grabbed the land itself. He tore open the earth, bending 2 great rivers, forcing them through the stables. And in a single day, the filth was washed away. Strength was not always about battle. Sometimes it was about bending the world itself. The 6th labor, from filth to flight. In the marshes of Arcadia, an eerie silence lay over the land. Nothing grew, no animals stirred. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, but above, hidden in the dense canopy, something lurked. Then, without warning, shadows moved. A screech tore through the air, followed by a storm of feathers sharp as knives, slicing through the trees. The Stymphalian birds, monstrous creatures of bronze and iron, rained death upon the land. Their beaks gleamed like daggers, their talons shredded flesh like brittle parchment. No army could fight them. No archer could match their speed. But Heracles did not wait to be attacked. From Hephaestus, the god of the forge, he had been given a sacred rattle, crafted from celestial bronze. With a single shake the sound burst forth, a clash of metal, unnatural, deafening. The birds shrieked, they burst from the trees, their wings flailing as the sound drove them into panic. Heracles took his bow and fired, arrows slicing through the air, striking them down one by one. The sky, once dark with their forms, cleared as they fled in terror, never to return, and Arcadia was safe again, but Heracles had no time to rest. The 7th labor, the Cretan bull, a beast of chaos, a gift from Poseidon turned into a curse upon the land. Once destined for sacrifice, King Minos had defied the gods, keeping the bull for himself. In response, Poseidon sent madness upon the creature, turning it wild. Its hooves tore through the earth, its breath scorched the fields, its horns gored all who stood before it. The people of Crete lived in fear. Heracles, with nothing but his strength, stood before it. The bull lowered its great head, nostrils flaring, hooves striking the ground like thunder. Then it charged. At the last moment, Heracles sidestepped, seizing its horns, twisting with all his might. The beast roared, thrashing, trying to throw him off, but Heracles did not let go. Slowly, inch by inch, he wrestled it to the ground, and when the dust settled, he stood victorious, the mighty beast subdued beneath him. The 8th labor, the mares of Diomedes, horses not ordinary nor noble, but cursed. Their eyes burned red with madness, their teeth stained with blood. For they did not graze on grass, they fed on flesh. King Diomedes, a tyrant without mercy, had bred them to be killers, releasing them upon those who defied him. They had devoured men whole, their hunger never sated. But Heracles knew that monsters recognized their own. Under the cover of darkness, he crept into their stable. They sensed him, nostrils flaring, eager for the taste of new prey. But before they could strike, he acted. He stormed the palace, dragging King Diomedes himself to the beasts. He threw him into their midst, and the mares, starved, wild, without their master's leash, turned on him. When they were done, the madness faded from their eyes. The curse was broken, and Heracles led them away, their terror over at last. The ninth labor, the girdle of Hippolyta, the Amazon queen, a warrior without equal. Her girdle was no mere ornament, it was a symbol of power, a gift from Ares, the god of war. King Eurystheus, ever cruel, had demanded it as a prize for his daughter. Heracles journeyed to the land of the Amazons, warriors fierce as any army. But when he arrived, there was no battle. Hippolyta met him, standing tall, unafraid. She saw him not as an enemy, but as an equal. She listened to his cause, and without hesitation, she unfastened the girdle and placed it in his hands. It could have ended there, but the gods do not allow peace so easily. Hera, ever jealous, whispered lies among the Amazons. She told them Heracles had come not for a gift, but for conquest. And so the warriors attacked. Steel met steel, spears shattered, arrows blackened the sky. Heracles fought his way out, the girdle still in his grasp, but he did not look back, not at the battle he had not wanted, not at the woman who had trusted him. And so he left, victorious. But at what cost? The 10th labor, the cattle of Geryon, a three-bodied giant, a herd guarded by a two-headed hound, a land where the sun burned hot and mercy did not exist. Heracles crossed the earth itself for this task, journeying to the ends of the world where Geryon ruled with an iron fist. The hound attacked first, swift, merciless. With a single blow of his club, the beast fell. Then came the giant. Geryon was no ordinary foe. 3 bodies, 3 times the strength, 3 times the rage. Heracles could not wrestle him, but he did not need to. Raising his bow, he loosed an arrow, guided by the hand of Apollo himself. It flew true, striking Geryon's heart. The giant fell, the cattle were his, and so he began the long journey home, the weight of the world growing heavier with each step. For 2 labors still remained, and these were different. Strength alone had carried Heracles through 10 trials, but the last 2 were not battles of might, they were battles of wit and of the soul. The 11th labor. Golden apples not of mortal lands, but of the divine, a gift of Gaia, the earth itself, to the gods. They lay in the garden of the Hesperides, guarded by a 100-headed dragon that never slept. To take them was impossible, and so Heracles did not try. Instead, he sought Atlas, the Titan, condemned to bear the sky upon his shoulders. If you retrieve the apples for me, Heracles offered, I will hold your burden. Atlas, eager for even a moment's relief, agreed. He stepped away, setting the heavens upon Heracles' back. For the first time, Heracles felt the true weight of the world. Atlas returned, apples in hand, but he had no intention of taking back his burden. I will deliver them, he said. You may carry the sky forever. Heracles did not panic. Instead, he nodded. Very well, he said, but let me adjust my cloak first, so I may hold the weight more comfortably. Atlas agreed, and the moment he took the sky once more, Heracles took the apples and walked away. The 12th labor, the last task, not to slay a beast, not to outwit a foe, but to walk into the land of the dead, to stand before Hades himself, and to take what belonged to the underworld, Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. Hades did not deny him. You may take him, the god said, but only if you subdue him without weapon or trickery, with only your hands. And so Heracles fought. 3 heads, 3 sets of fangs. The beast thrashed, its jaws snapping, its strength monstrous. But Heracles did not let go. He wrestled the creature to the ground, holding firm until it yielded. And when he returned to the world above, the 12 labors were complete. 12 impossible tasks, and yet he survived. But did he find peace? For his true battle was never against monsters. It was against himself, and that is why his name endures. Not because he was strong, but because he bore his burdens and never stopped pushing forward. This is the tale of Perseus. Before he was a hero, before his name echoed through time, Perseus was the son of prophecy. His grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, had received a warning. One day, his own grandson would be the cause of his death. Fearing the god's decree, he sought to outwit fate. He locked his daughter Danae away in a bronze chamber, sealed from the world. but fate does not bend, and neither does Zeus. One night a golden light flooded the chamber, and from that union Perseus was born. Acrisius, unwilling to risk divine wrath but too afraid to let the child live, placed Danae and her newborn in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea. But the waves did not swallow them. The gods had other plans. The sea carried them to Seriphos, where they were taken in by a kind fisherman, Dictys. Years passed, Perseus grew strong, his heart fearless, but peace was not meant to last. Polydectes, the king of Seriphos, desired Danae, yet she refused him. Perseus stood between the king and his mother, and Polydectes, sly and calculating, devised a plan to remove him. He feigned a great feast where every man was expected to bring a gift. Perseus, young and proud, had nothing to offer. With a mocking smile, Polydectes gave him a task. "Bring me the head of Medusa," he said. An impossible challenge, a death sentence, and yet Perseus agreed. Medusa was once a woman, a maiden of golden hair, devoted to Athena, her beauty unmatched. But beauty is dangerous in a world ruled by gods. Poseidon, mighty and cruel, saw her, and he took what he wanted. In the sacred halls of Athena's temple, he defiled her, and the goddess, filled not with mercy but with fury, laid her curse upon the innocent. Her hair twisted into living serpents. Her eyes, once bright, became a death sentence. One look, just one, and all who gazed upon her turned to stone. Exiled to the ends of the earth, Medusa was left to live, not as a woman, but as a nightmare, a punishment for a crime she did not commit. No man had ever faced Medusa and lived. But Perseus was not without allies. Athena, the very goddess who had cursed Medusa, came to him first. "Do not meet her gaze," she warned, placing a polished bronze shield in his hands. "Use this and see her without looking." Hermes, swift as the wind, gave him a blade, razor-thin, sharper than mortal steel, a weapon meant to pierce the unpierceable. But even with these gifts, Perseus still had to find Medusa, and the only ones who knew her location were the Grey, 3 ancient sisters, and they would not give up their secret willingly. Far beyond the lands of men, Perseus found them, 3 crones, old as time itself, their bodies frail, their faces hollow. They shared a single eye between them, passing it back and forth. Perseus did not ask for their help. He took it. With a swift hand, he seized the eye from their grasp. Blind and wailing, the sisters reached for it, but Perseus held it just beyond their reach. "Tell me where Medusa hides," he commanded. Helpless, they revealed what he needed to know. Only then did he return the eye, and with their bitter curses ringing in his ears, he set off. The island was silent. No birds, no wind, only stone. Figures frozen in their final moments of terror, warnings in the shape of men. Perseus stepped carefully, his shield raised, reflecting the world around him. Deep in the ruins of a forgotten temple, Medusa lay sleeping. Her serpents coiled and shifted, hissing softly in the dim light. Perseus moved closer. One mistake, and he would join the others. He lifted his blade, one strike, and Medusa's eyes would never open again. But fate is never so simple. As Perseus took his final step, a serpent flicked its tongue, sensing movement. Medusa's eyes opened. She did not roar, she did not scream, she simply breathed, and the air itself felt heavier. She turned her gaze toward him, but Perseus did not look. In the reflection of his shield, he saw her rise, her movements fluid, her presence otherworldly. A tragic queen in a prison of stone. She struck. He moved. Her claws tore through the air, scraping against the shield, sending sparks flying. The snakes in her hair lunged, biting, writhing, their venom dripping onto the cold stone floor. Perseus circled, waiting for his moment. And then he struck. The blade sliced clean. A single breath, a single gasp, and Medusa was no more. Her head fell to the ground, her golden curse still alive in death. But the story was not over. From Medusa's blood something stirred, a shape, a form, a winged stallion, white as the moon, Pegasus, born from death, born for legend. Perseus seized Medusa's head, wrapped it in cloth, and fled. Prize in hand, he rose into the sky. But his journey was not yet over, for fate had one more trial waiting for him. Far across the sea, in the kingdom of Ethiopia, there was a queen, Cassiopeia, a woman of beauty but also of vanity. She stood upon her throne, and in her pride she declared to the heavens, "I am more beautiful than the sea nymphs themselves, but the gods do not suffer arrogance, and the sea does not forget an insult. From the depths rose Poseidon's vengeance, a great sea monster, its form like a nightmare, its hunger endless. It ravaged the shores, tore through the cities, demanding retribution. And so the king, Cepheus, went to the oracle. "What must we do to stop this?" he pleaded, and the oracle's answer came like a blade. "Sacrifice your daughter, Andromeda, the fairest maiden of the land, the price of her mother's vanity. She was chained to the rocks, the waves crashing around her, a gift to the beast, and as the winds howled, as the shadow of the monster darkened the waters, she waited for death. But the gods had other plans, for Perseus was coming. High above, riding the winds on Pegasus' wings, Perseus saw her, a maiden bound in chains, her dark hair whipped by the wind, her eyes filled not with fear, but with defiance. And as the sea monster rose from the depths, jaws open, death in its eyes, Perseus acted. He called down to the king and queen. "If I save her, she is mine," he declared. And without waiting for an answer, he dove. The waves roared, the beast lunged, and Perseus, son of Zeus, warrior of fate, fell upon it like a storm. His blade flashed, the monster screamed. It struck its tail like a crashing wave, but Perseus dodged and struck again. Andromeda watched from the rocks, helpless as the battle raged. The sky darkened, the sea churned, but in the end, the hero was faster, the hero was stronger, and with one final thrust, Perseus drove his sword through the beast's heart. The sea fell silent, the monster sank, and Perseus had won. The people of Ethiopia rejoiced. Their princess was saved, their kingdom was free. And Perseus turned to Andromeda. She looked upon him, this warrior who had descended from the sky, who had risked his life to save her, and she loved him. But fate is never so kind, for there was another. Andromeda had been promised to Phineus, a jealous prince who now saw his prize slipping from his grasp. He raised his sword. "You will not take what is mine," he snarled, and Perseus, weary of battle, offered him mercy. "Fight me if you must," he said, "but I have slain a monster today. Do not force me to slay a man as well." Phineus did not listen. He charged, and Perseus lifted the head of Medusa. Phineus froze. His sword fell from his hand. His flesh turned cold, and before the eyes of all, the prince turned to stone. There would be no more challengers. Andromeda was his, and together they set sail, not for war, not for conquest, but for home. Perseus and Andromeda travelled to Seriphos, where King Polydectes still ruled, the man who had sent Perseus to his death, who had tormented his mother. Perseus entered the court, laid the head of Medusa before the king, and as Polydectes sneered, as he mocked the young warrior, Perseus lifted the Gorgon's face one last time. Polydectes and his men turned to stone where they stood. His mother was freed, justice was done, and the hero was finally at peace. Perseus and Andromeda ruled together, side by side. They raised sons who would become kings. They built a legacy that would endure beyond time. And when at last Perseus's mortal years came to an end, the gods did not forget him. For Zeus, his father, took him into the heavens, and Andromeda, his queen, stood beside him, not as mortals, not as forgotten names, but as constellations burning in the night sky, a hero, a maiden, a love written among the stars. Perseus fought not for power, not for gold, but for love. Andromeda was bound not by fate, but by the choice to love the man who had saved her. And so their story remains, a tale of heroism, of defiance, of a love that even the gods could not erase. There are stories that warn of gods and their wrath, stories of mortals who overstep, who challenge forces far greater than themselves. Some are struck down by lightning, some are swallowed by the sea, and some, through their own skill, invite the fury of the divine. This is the story of Arachne, a girl who wove too well, a girl who did not fear the gods, who did not bow to them, who believed that talent alone could make her great, and for that she paid a price. This is the tale of a weaver and a goddess, of pride and punishment, of a challenge that was never meant to be won. In the land of Lydia, where the rivers ran like silver and the hills rolled golden beneath the sun, there was a girl whose hands spun miracles. Arachne was her name, and her weaving was unlike anything the world had seen. Her fingers danced over the loom like the wind across the fields, threads bending to her will, forming images so lifelike they seemed ready to step from the fabric. Flowers bloomed in the weave, birds took flight, gods and mortals stood frozen in moments of triumph and tragedy. Word of her talent spread beyond her village, beyond her city, until even the nymphs of the forest came to watch her work. They whispered among themselves, calling her skill divine, a gift from Athena, the goddess of wisdom and craft. But Arachne did not smile at their words. She did not lower her eyes in humility. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke words that would seal her fate. Athena did not teach me, she declared. No god gave me this gift. I am the greatest weaver the world has ever known. Even Athena herself could not match my skill. A hush fell over the nymphs. They looked to one another with unease, for they knew what happened to those who spoke against the gods. But Arachne only laughed, her pride as unyielding as the thread she spun. She did not see the shadow that had fallen over her doorstep. She did not hear the wind shift, whispering warnings through the trees. The gods were listening, and Athena did not forgive insults lightly. Far above, from the halls of Olympus, Athena heard the boastful words. She had taught men to build, to fight, to think, and yet here was a girl who denied her gifts, who spoke as if she were greater than a goddess. Athena did not rage, as Zeus would have. She did not send storms or earthquakes. Instead, she descended to earth, stepping lightly from the heavens, shrouded in the form of an old woman. She found Arachne at her loom, surrounded by her admirers, her fingers working swiftly, creating images that dazzled the eye. The goddess approached, her voice gentle, her eyes sharp. "My child," she said, "your work is beautiful, worthy of praise, but do not let pride blind you. Give thanks to the gods for the gifts you have been given, and all will be well." Arachne scoffed, barely glancing at the old woman. "I give thanks to no one. My talent is my own. If Athena thinks otherwise, let her prove it." The room grew still. The nymphs edged away, sensing the storm that was about to break. The old woman straightened. The air around her shimmered, and in an instant the disguise was gone. Where once stood a frail old woman, now stood Athena in all her divine glory. Her grey eyes burned with something colder than anger, disappointment. The very air seemed to pulse with her presence, the weight of Olympus pressing down upon the small room. "You have called me, Arachne," she said, her voice now full of power, "and so I have come. If you wish to challenge a goddess, you shall have your chance." Arachne did not kneel. She did not beg. She only smiled. "Then let us weave." A great loom was set between them. The nymphs and villagers gathered, holding their breath, their eyes wide with fear and awe. They watched as Athena lifted her hands, and golden thread flowed like liquid light from her fingertips, weaving itself into the fabric as if the loom obeyed her will alone. Her tapestry took shape, an image of Olympus itself, shining and eternal. At its center stood the gods, mighty and just, their power displayed in all its glory. Around the edges, Athena wove warnings, mortal men and women who had defied the heavens, their fates sealed in sorrow. There was Niobe, weeping for her slain children, punished for her arrogance. There was Marsyas, flayed alive for daring to challenge Apollo. It was a masterpiece, a lesson, a warning. But Arachne did not falter. Her fingers moved swiftly, her thread a cascade of colors. She wove a different story, not one of gods in their splendor, but of gods in their cruelty. She wove Zeus disguised as a swan, deceiving Leda. She wove Poseidon's pursuit of Medusa, the betrayal of Athena's own priestess. She wove the mistakes, the arrogance, the wrath of the gods themselves. The crowd gasped, even the nymphs trembled, for Arachne had not woven a warning. She had woven the truth, and it was beautiful. For a long moment there was silence. Athena stood before the tapestry, her grey eyes unreadable. Then, with a single motion, she lifted her hand and struck. The tapestry was torn apart, the stories of the gods, the triumph of mortal hands, the truth that had been woven with such care, destroyed. The golden threads unraveled, dissolving into nothing. Arachne stumbled back, her chest heaving, rage and despair burning in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Athena stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not curse. Instead, she spoke softly. "You were right, Arachne," she said. "Your skill is unmatched, but you have no reverence, no humility. And so, if you wish to weave forever, so be it." A chill swept through the air. Arachne's limbs stiffened, her fingers curled, her skin darkened, her body twisted and shrank. She fell to the ground, not as a woman, but as a creature small and frail, her fingers now many, her form light as air. A spider, the first of her kind, doomed to weave for eternity. Athena turned away, her expression unreadable. She had not taken Arachne's life, but she had taken her pride. The nymphs whispered among themselves, some in sorrow, some in fear. Arachne, the greatest weaver of all, now dangled from a thread, spinning her silk endlessly, trapped in the web of her own defiance. And so, to this day, the spiders weave, thread upon thread, web upon web. Some say they still remember the girl who defied a goddess. Some say they still weave, not out of duty, but out of defiance. For talent alone is not enough. It must be tempered with wisdom and respect, or the gods will teach the lesson themselves. And so, when you see a spider spinning in the light of dawn, remember Arachne, not as a girl who lost, but as a girl who would not bow, and in her own way, never truly did. There are heroes whose names are etched into history, their deeds immortalized in stone and song, and then there are those whose stories are warnings. This is the tale of a man who flew higher than any before him, a man who conquered monsters and defied kings, a man whose pride led him to reach for the heavens themselves, and for that he fell. This is the story of Bellerophon, the slayer of the Chimera, the rider of Pegasus, the man who dared to challenge the gods. Bellerophon was not born a hero. He was a prince of Corinth, strong, skilled in battle, and favored by the gods. But fortune is fickle, and one mistake, one moment of fate, sent his life into ruin. A crime, a false accusation. Some say he killed a man. Others say he rejected the advances of a queen. What is known is this: Bellerophon was exiled. Cast out from his homeland, he sought refuge in the court of King Proetus of Tiryns. But fate was not done with him yet. The queen, Stheneboia, took notice of him. She desired him, and when he refused her, her desire turned to hatred. She whispered lies into the king's ear, accusing Bellerophon of trying to take what was not his. Proetus burned with fury, but he was not a fool. To kill a guest was to invite the wrath of the gods, and so he devised another plan. A task impossible to survive, a journey with no return. He sent Bellerophon to Lycia, to the court of King Iobates, carrying a sealed message, a message that read, "Kill the bearer of this letter." Iobates read the letter. He smiled, and then he set forth his challenge. "The Chimera," he said, "slay it, and you may live." The court fell silent, for no man could kill the Chimera, a beast of nightmares born from the depths of the earth itself. It had the body of a lion, the head of a goat, the tail of a serpent, and it breathed fire. Bellerophon was being sent to his death, unless he could do the impossible. No mortal could defeat the Chimera, but Bellerophon would not fight as a mortal. That night he wandered the land, seeking wisdom, seeking hope, and it was Athena who answered. In a dream she came to him, radiant, her grey eyes filled with quiet purpose. "If you are to slay the beast," she said, "you must first find your steed, a horse not of earth but of the heavens, a creature as wild as the wind, swift as the stars, Pegasus." No man had ever tamed Pegasus. The winged stallion was a gift from Poseidon himself, roaming free upon the hills, untouchable. But Athena did not leave Bellerophon without guidance. Beside him, as he awoke, lay a golden bridle, shimmering in the morning light. With it in hand, he journeyed to the sacred spring where Pegasus drank. He moved carefully, slow, and as Pegasus turned to flee, Bellerophon raised the bridle. The moment it touched the stallion's head, the beast stilled, and for the first time a mortal sat upon its back. The sky belonged to him, and now so would victory. The ground shook beneath the beast's footsteps. The air burned with the heat of its breath. It towered before him, its three heads snapping, its lion's roar shaking the mountains. The Chimera had slaughtered armies, it had turned heroes to ash, but no hero had ever come from the sky. Bellerophon rose, Pegasus' wings slicing through the air. The beast turned, snarling, its serpent's tail lashing. It had never faced a foe it could not reach, but its fire did not fear the heavens. It opened its mouth. And the sky burned. Flames seared the air, chasing Pegasus through the clouds. Bellerophon dove, his spear striking, but the beast's hide was thick as iron. It would not fall so easily. Again and again he attacked, but the Chimera fought like a storm, its heads moving as one, its fire relentless. Then, an idea. He rose high out of the beast's reach and drew his spear. Not for the flesh, for the mouth. He plunged from the sky, his spear wrapped in lead, aiming not for the Chimera's heart, but for its fire. The moment the beast roared, Bellerophon struck. The lead melted in its throat, sealing its breath, smothering its flames. It choked, it staggered, and then, at last, it fell. The Chimera was dead, and Bellerophon had done the impossible. He returned to Lycia, expecting betrayal, expecting treachery. But Iobates did not kill him. He did not dare. Instead, he knelt. He offered his daughter's hand in marriage. He made Bellerophon his heir. The slayer of the Chimera was no longer an outcast. He was a king, a hero, a legend. But legends do not last forever, and even heroes can fall. It was not enough, not for him. Bellerophon had conquered the earth. Now he longed for the heavens. He mounted Pegasus once more, and he flew, upper, past the mountains, past the clouds, higher, toward Olympus itself, toward the home of the gods. For what hero, what king, did not belong among them? But the gods do not welcome the uninvited. Zeus watched, and Zeus judged. A single moment, a whisper of divine will, and Pegasus bucked. Bellerophon reached, but there was nothing to hold on to. The sky vanished beneath him, and the earth rose to meet him. He did not die. Not at first. Broken, crippled, cast aside by the very gods he had sought to join, Bellerophon wandered the earth. No longer a hero, no longer a king, just a man who had once soared, and now could not even walk. Bellerophon had defeated the Chimera. He had risen higher than any before him, but in the end he was not struck down by a monster, nor by a king, nor by a god, but by himself. For the greatest danger is not the beast in the cave, nor the fire that burns, it is the hunger for more, and the fall that follows. So remember Bellerophon, not just as the slayer of the Chimera, not just as the rider of Pegasus, but as the man who tried to claim the heavens, and learned too late that some heights are never meant to be reached. There are love stories that end in joy, and then there are those that end in silence. This is not a story of triumph. It is a story of music, of devotion, of a love so deep it defied the very laws of life and death. This is the story of Orpheus, a man whose song could make the gods weep, and Eurydice, the woman he loved beyond reason, beyond fate, beyond the grasp of the underworld itself. But love alone cannot change destiny, and some stories are meant to break the heart. Orpheus was no ordinary man. He was the son of Calliope, the muse of poetry, and a mortal king. But his true gift did not come from lineage. It came from his hands, from his voice, from the lyre he carried wherever he went. When Orpheus played, rivers slowed their course to listen. The wind grew still, trees bent their branches toward him, longing for the sound. Even the wild beasts, the hunters and the hunted alike, gathered in peace at his feet, enchanted by his song. It was said that no heart, mortal or divine, could resist him. But of all the wonders Orpheus ever knew, none shone brighter than her, Eurydice. The moment he saw her, the music in his heart swelled. greater than it had ever been. She was a dryad, a daughter of the forest, a spirit of the wild places. She moved like the wind through the trees, her laughter like the rustling of leaves, her presence as warm as the sun breaking through the morning mist. He loved her, and she loved him, and so they wed, their love sealed not in riches, not in the blessings of kings, but in the sound of his lyre, in the music that bound them together. But fate is cruel to those who love too deeply, and the gods do not suffer happiness for long. It was the day after their wedding. The sun shone, the sky was clear, and Eurydice danced through the fields, laughing in the golden light. She did not see the viper coiled in the grass. A single step, a bite, a gasp, pain. She fell, and by the time Orpheus reached her side, she was already gone. The world grew silent. His lyre slipped from his hands. The music in his heart, the music that had once commanded rivers, tamed beasts, and softened the hearts of the gods, was gone, and the world was emptier for it. But grief can break a man, or it can drive him forward. Orpheus did not weep. He did not curse the heavens, nor cry out against fate. Instead, he picked up his lyre, and he walked, not to the temples, not to the priests, but to the land of the dead, to the underworld, to where no living soul had ever travelled and returned. For if Eurydice was lost to death, then he would face death itself to bring her home. He walked to the ends of the earth where the land grew cold and the light faded into shadows. He found the entrance to the underworld, hidden beyond the mortal realm, where the river Styx coiled like a serpent of black water. There, waiting upon the shore, was Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He did not ask for payment, he did not refuse passage, for when Orpheus played, even the river forgot its course. The boat drifted forward, carrying him into the world of shades, where the air was thick with whispers, where the dead roamed, their faces hollow, their eyes filled with longing for the life they had left behind. The gates of the underworld loomed before him, and there, guarding the entrance, was Cerberus, the monstrous hound, its 3 heads snarling, its eyes glowing like embers. But Orpheus did not raise a sword. He did not run. He played. The lyre's melody filled the dark corridors, wrapping itself around the beast like a gentle hand, and the guardian of the dead lay down, silent, unmoving, letting him pass. Through the halls of the underworld, Orpheus walked, his music leading him deeper and deeper into the realm of the dead, until at last he stood before the throne of Hades himself, the lord of the underworld, dark and unmoved, and beside him Persephone, the queen of the dead, with sorrow in her eyes. No mortal had ever come this far. No mortal had ever dared to ask what Orpheus asked now. "Give her back to me," he said, and then he played, a song of love and loss, of longing so deep it shook the very foundations of the underworld. The spirits wept, the fates themselves who spun the threads of life and death hesitated. Even Hades, the unyielding god, sat in silence, listening, and when the final note faded into the still air, the god of the dead spoke. "Take her," he said, "but on one condition." "She will follow behind you," Hades said, "but until you leave my realm, you must not look back. Not once. If you do, she will be lost to you forever." Orpheus did not hesitate. He turned, and he walked. Behind him Eurydice followed, her steps silent, her presence nothing but a whisper. Through the halls of the dead, past the sleeping Cerberus, across the river Styx where Charon waited, through the caverns, through the dark, toward the light of the world above, step by step, and yet, doubt is a cruel thing. Was she truly there? Did Hades trick him? Was she only a shadow, a memory trailing behind? He could not hear her, he could not feel her, and the doubt grew heavier with every step. The threshold was before him, daylight, freedom, one more step, but the silence was too much to bear, and in the last moment, he turned. For the briefest heartbeat, he saw her, Eurydice, her eyes filled with love, with sorrow, with longing, and then she was gone, pulled back into the underworld, vanishing like mist in the morning light. Orpheus reached for her, but there was nothing, nothing but empty air, nothing but silence. He did not return to the underworld, not because he did not try, but because the gates no longer opened for him. And so he wandered. He sang no more, the trees did not bow, the rivers did not pause, and the world, once full of music, fell quiet. Some say he was torn apart by those who could not stand his silence. Some say he wasted away, waiting for death to reunite them. But all agree on this. Even now, when the wind moves through the trees, when a lyre's melody lingers in the air, it is his song they hear, a song of love, of loss, and of a single fateful glance, because some love stories do not end in joy, some end in silence, and some never end at all. There are stories the stars tell, stories of gods and mortals, of love and cruelty, of those who defied fate and those who were swallowed by it. Some names are written in history, others are written in the heavens. This is the story of Callisto, a huntress of the wild, a maiden of the moon, a woman whose beauty caught the eye of a god, and whose fate was sealed because of it. She did not seek the love of Zeus. She did not ask for his touch, yet her life was undone by it. And when the gods turned their eyes upon her, mercy was nowhere to be found, only punishment, only transformation, only the cold embrace of the stars. In the great forests of Arcadia, where the rivers ran clear and the trees stretched endlessly toward the sky, there lived a huntress named Callisto. She was not a queen, not a goddess, not a woman draped in silks and jewels. She was wild as the land itself. Her feet knew only the dirt of the earth, her hands the curve of a bowstring, her breath the rhythm of the hunt. She was one of Artemis's chosen, a maiden of the moon, sworn to a life of freedom, untouched by men, bound only to the wild and the goddess she worshipped. She had no need for love, no use for marriage, no desire beyond the chase, beyond the sisterhood of those who roam the forest beside her. But the gods do not care for the wishes of mortals, and Zeus, king of Olympus, had been watching. It was not love, it was never love, it was hunger. Zeus had seen Callisto among the huntresses of Artemis, her beauty untouched, her strength unmatched, and for that he wanted her. Gods do not ask, gods do not wait, they take. And so Zeus came to her not as himself, but in disguise. Beneath the silver light of the moon, as Callisto wandered alone, a figure approached, Artemis herself, or so she thought, the goddess, her protector, her sister, smiling upon her, embracing her. But it was not Artemis, it was Zeus, and when Callisto realized the truth, it was too late. Her cries were swallowed by the night, and the stars above remained silent. When the dawn came, she did not speak. She could not. She returned to her sisters, to Artemis, to the only home she had ever known, but the truth could not stay hidden forever. Time passed, her body changed, the whispers began, and then one day, beneath the watchful gaze of the goddess she had worshipped all her life, Callisto's secret was revealed. She was with child, a child she had never asked for, a child that marked her as defiled. Artemis's face turned cold. The huntresses stepped back, their eyes filled with betrayal. No words were spoken, none were needed. Callisto had broken her vow, they thought. She had allowed herself to be touched, to be claimed, to be ruined. It did not matter that she had no choice. It did not matter that she had never wanted this. The goddess of purity did not forgive. And so Callisto was cast out, from the hunt, from her home, from the only life she had ever known. She wandered alone, abandoned, carrying the weight of another's sin. But her punishment was not yet over, because Hera was watching. Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, had seen everything. She had seen Zeus' betrayal. She had seen Callisto's fall, and though she knew the fault lay with her husband, she did not strike at him. She never did. Her fury, as always, fell upon the mortal. Callisto, who had stolen nothing. Callisto, who had never wanted Zeus's love. Callisto, who had already lost everything. But it was not enough. So Hera cursed her. She reached down from Olympus, her voice cold as the mountain winds, and spoke a single word. And in that moment Callisto was no longer a woman, no longer a mother, no longer herself. Her limbs twisted, her voice vanished into a growl, her hands became claws, her body swelled with muscle and fur. She was a bear, a beast, a creature of the wild, and the last trace of the girl she had been was gone. Alone in the forests she had once roamed as a huntress, she wandered. The rivers she had once bathed in rejected her, her reflection no longer human. The trees that had once been her home offered no comfort. The sisters she had once fought beside would kill her if they saw her now. But she lived. She had no choice. She learned the ways of the beast, learned to move unseen, to run when she once would have stood and fought, and in time she gave birth. A son, a boy, human, untouched by the curse that had taken his mother. His name was Arcus, and he was all she had left. Years passed. Arcus grew strong and proud, never knowing the truth of his mother's fate. He became a hunter, like his mother before him, his bow steady, his arrows swift, and one day, deep in the woods, he saw a bear. She saw him, her son. She stepped forward, but Arcus saw only a beast. His bow was raised, his arrow drawn. He did not know, he did not understand, and the gods, watching from the heavens, did not wait for the tragedy to unfold. For the first time, Zeus did not take. He did not strike with thunder. He did not let fate have its way. Instead, he reached down, and with a touch of his hand, the stars themselves bent to his will. Callisto was lifted from the earth, her form stretching, changing once more, not into the woman she had been, but into something greater. Her fur became light, her body became vast, and as Arcus watched, his mother rose into the night sky, her shape forever imprinted upon the heavens. Ursa Major, the great bear, no longer hunted, no longer lost, but eternal. And before Arcus could weep, before he could cry out in grief, he too was lifted. And beside his mother a smaller constellation burned, Ursa Minor, the little bear, mother and son, together, forever. The gods had cursed her, they had abandoned her, they had turned her into something she was never meant to be, but in the end they could not erase her. Even now, when night falls and the sky stretches wide above us, she remains, a reminder, a warning, a promise, that though the gods are cruel, though fate is unkind, some souls cannot be forgotten. They shine, and they endure. So when you look to the night sky, when you trace the great bear among the stars, remember Callisto, not for what she lost, but for what she became, unbreakable, undying, a story written in the heavens, forever. There are crimes that mortals commit against mortals, and then there are crimes that reach beyond the world of men, crimes against the gods, crimes that echo through time. This is the story of Tantalus, a man who stood among the divine, a man beloved by Olympus, a man who had everything and lost it all. For there are no greater sins than arrogance, betrayal, and the hunger for power that should never belong to mortals. And for such sins, there are punishments that do not end. Once there was no man greater than Tantalus, a king of Lydia, blessed beyond measure, son of Zeus himself. His wealth knew no limits, his power stretched far and wide. But it was not gold that set him apart, it was privilege. For while men worshipped the gods from afar, Tantalus dined at their table. He walked upon Olympus, seated among the immortals, drinking nectar, feasting on ambrosia. He listened to the whispers of the divine, secrets never meant for mortal ears. He was not a god, but he was treated like one, and that was his undoing. For Tantalus did not see himself as a guest at the table of Olympus. He saw himself as an equal, and that was the first mistake. The first betrayal was theft. The gods trusted him. He sat beside them, drank their wine, laughed at their stories, and when no one was watching, he took. He stole nectar and ambrosia from their halls, carrying the divine gifts back to his people, believing he could share what was never meant for mortals. He thought himself generous, but generosity was not his intent. It was power. For what is a king who holds the food of the gods, who offers his people what no other ruler could? A god in his own right, or so he believed, but this was only the beginning. The worst was yet to come. Pride is a hunger that cannot be sated, and so Tantalus wished to prove himself greater still. But how does a man test the gods? How does he challenge those who cannot be beaten? With a feast that would shake the heavens themselves. And so he prepared a banquet, one meant not for men, but for gods, a grand meal, a dish unlike any before it. His own son, Pelops, a boy with golden hair, with laughter in his eyes, a child who trusted the hands that raised him, a child who did not know what his father had planned. Tantalus killed him. He carved him into pieces. He boiled his flesh, seasoned it with herbs, laid it before the gods, and watched. Would they know? Would their wisdom fail them? Would they eat? Would they prove themselves no greater than men? The hall fell silent. The gods did not touch their plates. They smelled the truth before the first bite. The air was thick with something foul, something wrong. Only one among them was fooled. Demeter. Weeping, lost in sorrow, grieving for her stolen daughter, Persephone. She did not see. She did not think. And so she took a single bite, a sliver of flesh, a piece of an innocent child, and then the truth came crashing down upon them all. Zeus rose in fury. The table was overturned. The banquet, a horror never meant to be, was shattered, and Tantalus, the man who had once dined among the gods, now stood alone, silent, watching, waiting for judgment. It did not take long. The gods do not forgive such crimes. They do not show mercy to those who defile their sacred laws. And so Tantalus was struck down, banished, cursed, cast into the deepest pit of the underworld, where no mortal had ever fallen before, Tartarus, where only the worst of the damned dwell. But Pelops was innocent, and the gods, for all their wrath, do not punish the blameless. They gathered his remains piece by piece, reshaped him with their hands, and breathed life into his body once more. He awoke, whole, untouched, save for one thing. The missing piece that Demeter had eaten, a sliver of flesh, lost forever. And so the gods gave him a new one, crafted from ivory, pure and white, a mark of his suffering, a mark of his father's sin. And then Pelops left Olympus, to rule, to build, to carve his name into history, while his father fell into torment without end. There are many punishments in the underworld. Sisyphus, doomed to roll his boulder, Ixion, bound to a flaming wheel, but Tantalus was given a different torment, one fitting for a man who had feasted with the gods. For eternity he stands in a pool of water, cool and clear, its surface shimmering beneath him. He is thirsty, so thirsty, but when he bends to drink, the water vanishes, sinking into the earth before his lips can touch it. Above him, branches heavy with fruit hang low, ripe and golden, their scent sweet, their skin bursting with juice. He reaches, the wind rises, the branches pull away, always just beyond his grasp. Hunger, thirst, an agony without end, a punishment that mirrors his crime, for he stole from the gods, and now, no matter how he reaches, how he yearns, how he suffers, he will never taste again. There are crimes too great for forgiveness. There are sins too monstrous to be undone. Tantalus had been a man of power, a man who stood among the gods, but in his greed, in his arrogance, he lost everything. And his name did not vanish into dust. It became a word for those who long for something they will never have, a word for suffering just out of reach, a word that lingers as eternal as his torment. Tantalize, to see, to want, to hunger, and to know it will never be yours. So remember Tantalus, not for his throne, not for his wealth, not for his power, but for his punishment, a king who reached too far, a father who lost his son, a man who dined with the gods, and was left forever starving. There are stories of love that bloom like spring, bright, warm, and fleeting. And then there are stories of love that linger like winter, cold, enduring, and unshaken by time. This is the tale of a god who ruled over the dead, a maiden who danced among the flowers, and the moment their worlds collided, changing both the heavens and the earth forever. This is the story of Hades and Persephone, a love that was never meant to be, and yet one that has never faded. In the golden fields of the mortal world, where flowers bloom in endless meadows and rivers run clear as crystal, there lived a girl untouched by sorrow. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, a maiden of spring, her laughter as light as the wind through the trees, her touch bringing life wherever she stepped. She was young, she was free. She knew nothing of darkness, nothing of loss, nothing of the world beyond the sunlit fields where her mother watched over her. And the gods, the mortals, even the flowers themselves loved her for it. But the world is not made for innocence to last forever, and below the earth, in the realm of shadows, there was one who watched, one who waited, one who had seen all things, yet had never seen anything like her. Hades. Far from the land of the living, beneath the weight of the world itself, there was a kingdom without light, the underworld, a place where no flowers grew, where rivers did not run with water, but with souls, where the dead gathered, silent and pale, waiting for eternity to pass. This was the realm of Hades, not a place of fire, not a place of torment, simply a place of endings, and for eons he ruled it alone, the least loved of the gods, the least worshipped, the least feared. For what mortal thinks of death before it arrives? Hades did not rage, as Zeus did. He did not scheme, as Poseidon did. He simply reigned, patient, steady, silent as the grave, until one day he looked upon the world above and saw her, Persephone, and for the first time in eternity, he wanted. Love is not always gentle. Sometimes it comes like a storm, like a shadow cast over the brightest day, like the breaking of the earth itself. One afternoon, as Persephone wandered far from her mother's gaze, her hands weaving crowns of flowers, the ground beneath her trembled. A single crack, then another, and then, before she could cry out, the land split open beneath her feet. From the darkness below, a chariot of blackened gold rose, its wheels forged from obsidian, its horses wreathed in flame, and at its helm, Hades. His hand reached for her, and in a breath she was gone. The earth sealed shut, and the fields of spring fell silent. She awoke in a world that had never seen sunlight. The air was heavy, thick with silence. The walls were carved from endless stone, the rivers darker than the night sky, and everywhere, shadows. The halls of the dead stretched around her, vast and endless, filled with souls that wandered like forgotten dreams, and before her stood Hades. He was not cruel, he was not unkind, but he was not mortal. His voice was steady, his eyes deep as the abyss, and when he spoke it was not with malice, but with certainty. "You are to be my queen," he said, and Persephone, who had never been told no, who had never known anything beyond the embrace of her mother's love, felt the weight of those words. She was no longer a girl in the fields. She was something else now, something new, something lost. The world does not stand still in the wake of loss, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest, mother of Persephone, felt her grief like a blade to the heart. She searched, she called, she wept, but no answer came. And as the days passed, as her sorrow deepened, so too did the world change. The rivers dried, the earth grew cold, the flowers withered, the trees barren, the fields once golden with wheat turned to dust beneath an empty sky. For the first time the world knew winter, and the gods watched in silence, for even they feared the grief of a mother. And so, at last, Zeus himself intervened. His voice carried through the heavens, into the depths of the underworld, where Persephone stood beside the god of the dead. "Return her," Zeus commanded, and Hades, who had taken much but had never stolen a soul, bowed his head. "If she wishes to leave," he said, "she may go." But fate is not so simple, for before she left, Hades made one final offer. A single fruit split open in his palm, a pomegranate, its seeds red as spilled blood. "A gift," he said, "a choice." And Persephone, who had once known only sunlight, who had walked through shadows and emerged unchanged, took it. She ate 6 seeds, 6 bites, a bond forged in the quiet of the underworld. And when she stepped into the light once more, when she fell into her mother's arms, when Demeter rejoiced and the earth bloomed anew, Zeus saw the truth. She had eaten of the underworld. She could not leave it behind, not forever. And so, a bargain was struck. For 6 months of the year, Persephone would walk among the living, beneath the golden sky, beside her mother, and the world would flourish in her joy. Spring, summer, life. But for the other 6, she would return to the halls of the dead, seated beside Hades as his queen, and the world above would mourn her absence. Autumn, winter, stillness, and so the seasons were born, not from nature, not from time, but from love, from loss, from a maiden who became a queen, and a god who was no longer alone. Persephone was no longer just the daughter of Demeter, no longer just the maiden of the fields. She was both light and darkness, both spring and winter, both the warmth of life and the stillness of death. And when the flowers bloom, when the rivers run free, when the sun stretches high in the sky, it is because she has returned. But when the world grows cold, when the earth sleeps beneath frost and ice, it is because she is with him, in the underworld, where she is not a prisoner, but a queen. And so when the seasons change, when the world shifts between warmth and cold, between life and stillness, remember this. The tale of Persephone and Hades is not just a story of loss. It is a story of balance, a story of 2 worlds forever entwined, a love that moves the earth itself, and a queen who walks between the light and the dark, and belongs to both. There are stories of love that defy time, and then there are stories that are broken by it. Some lovers are parted by war, by fate, by death itself, but some are parted by something far crueler, endlessness. This is the story of Eos, the goddess of the dawn, who fell in love with a mortal man, and Tithonus, a prince whose beauty rivaled the light of morning itself, a love that reached beyond the limits of time, but not beyond its cost. For the gods may grant immortality, but they do not grant mercy. Before the sun rises, before the sky is painted in hues of gold and crimson, there is a moment of quiet light. That moment belongs to Eos, the goddess of the dawn. She is not the sun nor the moon, but the first touch of morning upon the world. She rides across the heavens in a chariot of rose and gold, her fingers stretching to wake the sleeping earth. She is beauty. She is light, but she is also longing, for Eos was cursed by Aphrodite herself, doomed to forever crave love, to hunger for mortal embrace, to fall again and again into the arms of men who could never stay. And so one day she saw him, Tithonus, a prince of Troy, his voice like music, his form like a sculpture carved by the gods themselves, and she loved him, as she had loved before, as she would love again, but this time she would not lose him, not to age, not to death, not to the cruel hands of time. The gods do not give without taking, they do not grant gifts without a price. But Eos, in her passion, in her desperation, did not think of such things. She flew to Olympus, her golden robes billowing, her voice trembling with devotion. "Give him to me," she pleaded. "Let him stay with me forever. Let him never die." Zeus from his throne of thunder listened, and he granted her wish. Tithonus would never perish. His soul would never leave the world. But the gods are cruel, for she had asked for eternal life, but she had not asked for eternal youth, and the difference would break them both. At first they were happy. Eos carried Tithonus to the heavens, where no mortal had ever gone before. She kissed his lips beneath the first light of dawn, whispered his name into the wind, wove her fingers through his golden hair, and he loved her in return. But time is patient. It does not rush. It does not warn. And so the years passed. Tithonus did not die, but he did not stay the same. His hair turned silver, his skin wrinkled, his body withered, his hands shook where they had once been strong, and still he did not die. Eos watched helpless as the man she loved, the man she had fought to keep, faded into something unrecognizable. She had saved him from death, but she had not saved him from time. There is no pain like living beyond your years, no torment like being trapped in a body that has long since failed. Tithonus could no longer stand, could no longer hold her, could no longer whisper words of love. His voice became brittle, his limbs fragile, and still he lived. His eyes, once filled with passion, now held only the weight of years, the exhaustion of an existence without end, and Eos, who had only ever wanted love, watched as he crumbled. She could not take back her wish. She could not free him from the eternity she had given him. All she could do was listen as he begged, not for life, but for death. But the gods do not take back what they have given, not even Eos, and so she did the only thing she could. She changed him, not into dust, not into shadow, but into something smaller, something fragile, something that would endure without suffering, a cicada, a creature that sings endlessly, that chirps beneath the summer sun, voice thin and reedy, a sound both alive and hollow, no longer a man, no longer her lover, but still he lingers, still he sings, and Eos, the goddess of the dawn, still rises each morning, still spreads her golden light across the sky. But she does not smile as she once did. She does not laugh as she once had. Because now, every morning, when the sun begins to rise, she hears his voice, not as a prince, not as a man, but as a whisper in the trees, a song that will never end and never be answered. Immortality is not the same as eternity, and eternity is not the same as love. Eos wished for forever, but forever was not kind. Tithonus was spared from death, but not from suffering, and so his story remains, a warning, a whisper, a song that never fades. Even now, when summer comes, when cicadas cry beneath the golden sky, they say it is him, Tithonus, still singing, still longing, still waiting for an end that will never come. So when the dawn rises, when the air fills with the song of the cicada, remember Eos and Tithonus, a goddess who loved too much, a mortal who lived too long, and a wish that was never meant to be made. There are many heroes in the world of myth, warriors who slay monsters, kings who command armies, gods who walk among men. But some legends are not written in blood. Some are written upon the waves, in the spray of the sea, in the roar of storms, in the sails of a ship bound for the unknown. This is the tale of Jason, a man who was promised a throne only to find that destiny demands more than mere birthright. A man who sought the greatest prize in the world, the Golden Fleece and the Argonauts, a band of heroes greater than any before or after, gathered under a single mast, setting sail for glory, a voyage of danger, a journey of betrayal, a love that would end in ruin, and a name that would never be forgotten. Jason was born a prince, but before he could take his first steps, before he could speak his first words, his throne was stolen. His uncle Peleus, a man of ambition and fear, had overthrown Jason's father, King Aeson of Iolcus, and seized the crown for himself. But fate does not forget its rightful kings, and so Jason was carried away in secret, placed under the care of the wise and ancient centaur Chiron, a teacher of heroes. Under Chiron's watchful eye, Jason learned the ways of war. He honed his strength, trained in the art of the sword and the bow, and studied the wisdom of the gods. But most of all, he was taught patience. That power means nothing without the wisdom to wield it. Years passed, Jason grew strong, and when the time was right, he descended from the mountains and made his way to Iolcus to reclaim his birthright. But the gods, ever watchful, had already set his path in motion. Peleus was not blind to fate. A prophecy had reached him, that one day a man wearing a single sandal would come to take his throne. And so, when Jason stepped into the city, when the people turned and whispered at his strength, at his bearing, Peleus' eyes fell to his feet. One sandal. The omen had arrived, but the usurper was clever. He did not deny Jason's claim. He did not draw his sword. Instead, he smiled. "If you wish to take my throne," he said, "then prove you are worthy. Bring me the golden fleece." Jason did not know what lay ahead, but he knew this. The throne of Iolcus was his by right, and no man, no god, no beast would keep him from it. A quest such as this demanded more than a single man, And so Jason sought the greatest ship the world had ever seen. Under the hands of Argus, the master builder, with the blessings of Athena, the vessel was forged from enchanted wood, its prow carved from the sacred oak of Dodona, a tree that could whisper the will of the gods, and he named it Argo. But a ship is nothing without its crew, and so Jason sent word across Greece, calling upon the bravest, the strongest, the most legendary heroes of the age. And they came: Heracles, son of Zeus, with strength unmatched; Orpheus, the musician whose songs could move even the stones; Atalanta, the swift-footed huntress, faster than any man; Castor and Pollux, twin warriors of the heavens; Zets and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind; and many more, a crew of legends, and with their oars slicing the sea, they set sail, not knowing that the gods were watching, not knowing that their greatest trials had not yet begun. The first stop on their journey was Lemnos, an island shrouded in mystery. The people welcomed them, but there was something strange. There were no men, only women. The queen of Lemnos, Hypsipyle, revealed the truth. The women had slain their husbands, every last one, for betraying them with foreign slaves. Now they were alone, and they longed for company. The Argonauts were tempted. Some wished to stay, but Jason, ever mindful of his mission, resisted. He took Hypsipyle as his lover for a single night, and then at dawn he and his men returned to the Argo, for they had not come for pleasure, they had come for glory. The next land they reached was the kingdom of the Doliones, ruled by the young king Sisyphus. The people welcomed the Argonauts with open arms, offering them supplies and friendship. But fate is cruel. That night, as Jason and his crew set sail once more, a storm rose. The wind twisted their course, and they were thrown back to shore. But in the darkness, the Doliones did not recognize them. Thinking of them as raiders, they attacked. The Argonauts fought back. Blades flashed, arrows flew, blood soaked the sand. And when the sun rose, the truth was revealed. Jason had slain Sisyphus with his own hand, a king who had once been his friend. The Argonauts grieved, but there was no time for mourning. The sea called, the fleece awaited, and so they sailed on. The Argonauts' journey brought them to the court of Phineus, a seer who had been cursed by the gods. Each day his table was filled with food, and each day the Harpies came, monstrous shrieking creatures with the bodies of birds and the faces of women. They stole his meals before he could take a single bite. Jason, seeing the old king suffering, made a pact. "If we rid you of this curse," he said, "you must tell us how to find Colchis." Phineus agreed, and so Zetes and Calais, the winged Argonauts, took to the sky. They chased the Harpies beyond the edge of the world, and at last the creatures fled, never to return. In gratitude, Phineus revealed what lay ahead: the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, a passage that no ship had ever survived. The Symplegades were no mere cliffs. They were living things, two monstrous walls of stone that crushed anything that passed between them. The Argonauts watched, their hands tight on their oars, as the waves churned and the rocks slammed together with a sound like thunder. No ship could pass, but Jason had been given wisdom. He took a dove from his cloak and let it fly. The bird darted forward, and the rocks moved. Stone slammed against stone, the air filled with dust and broken feathers. But the dove emerged, one tail feather lost, but alive. A sign. The Argonauts rowed with all their might. The Argo flew across the waves, the cliffs trembling as they closed. And just as they came together, the Argo slipped through, a breath of space, a heartbeat from doom, and the sea lay open before them. But their greatest trial still waited. They had faced storms and sorrow. They had outrun curses and defied the gods. They had survived the clashing rocks, their ship slipping through the jaws of death itself. But their journey was not over. Ahead lay the land of Colchis, the kingdom of King Aeetes, the home of the Golden Fleece, a land that would welcome them not with open arms, but with fire, treachery, and blood. Jason had come for a prize, but what awaited him was a choice that would shape his fate forever. Beyond the dark waters of the Black Sea, the Argonauts sailed into Colchis, a land of mystery and power. The palace of King Aeetes stood high upon the cliffs, gleaming with gold and guarded by warriors clad in bronze. But more dangerous than spears and swords was the king himself. Aeetes was no fool. He was the son of the sun god Helios, a ruler of cunning and cruelty. And the fleece, the sacred golden pelt of the ram of Hermes, was the heart of his power. To surrender it was unthinkable, and yet Jason stood before him, fearless. "Give me the golden fleece," he said, "and we will leave in peace." The court erupted in laughter. Aeetes smiled, but his eyes burned like embers. "If you want the fleece," he said, "then earn it." He set Jason a challenge, a task no mortal could survive. Tame the fire-breathing bulls of Hephaestus, plow a field with their strength, sow the earth with dragon's teeth, and slay the warriors that would rise from the ground. Jason's fate was sealed, but in the shadows, someone else was watching. Medea, daughter of Aeetes, priestess of Hecate, goddess of witchcraft. Her heart had never known love. She was fire and shadow, a woman of magic and secrets. But when she looked upon Jason, the gods wove their own spell. Aphrodite had sent her son, Eros, to loose his arrow, and when it struck Medea's heart, she loved Jason before she knew why. And so that night she came to him in secret. "If you face my father's trial alone, you will die," she whispered. "But if you trust me, I will give you victory." Jason hesitated, for to take her aid was to betray her father, to betray her people, to betray everything she had ever known. But he was a man of destiny, and she was a woman of power. So he swore an oath. "Help me," he said, "and I will take you with me. I will love you. I will never leave you." A promise made beneath the stars, a promise that would one day be broken. At dawn, Jason stood before the bulls of Hephaestus. Their bodies were forged of bronze, their breath hotter than any forge. No man had ever touched them and lived. But Jason was no ordinary man. Medea had given him a potion of fireproofing, an unguent whispered from the darkest roots of magic. As the bulls roared, their flames engulfed him. But he did not burn. He seized the horns of the first beast. It thrashed, its hooves shattering stone, its fury like a storm. But Jason held firm. With all his strength he forced the beast to the ground, then the second, and when both were yoked to the great iron plough, the earth trembled beneath their steps. The impossible had been done, but the trial was not yet over. The field lay bare before him. Aeetes watched, his expression darkening, for no mortal should have survived the bulls. But still Jason was not finished. From the folds of his robe he withdrew the teeth of a dragon, a gift from the gods. He scattered them into the soil, and from the earth rose an army, men clad in bronze, their eyes empty, their blades gleaming, warriors born from the land itself, born only to kill. They turned to Jason and charged, but Medea had given him one final piece of wisdom. "They are born without a leader," she had whispered. "Throw a stone among them, and they will turn on each other." Jason lifted a great rock and hurled it into their midst. The first warrior struck the second struck the third, and in moments the army that had been made from the same earth destroyed itself. When the dust cleared, Jason stood alone, victorious. But Aeetes did not smile, for Jason had won the trial, but he would never leave Colchis alive. That night, Medea returned to Jason's side. "My father will not give you the fleece," she warned. "He will kill you before the sun rises, so we must take it, now." Together they fled to the sacred grove of Ares, where the fleece hung from an ancient tree. But it was not unguarded, for at the base of the tree coiled a dragon, a beast that never slept, a creature that could not be slain. Medea whispered words of power, a lullaby of darkness, a spell of slumber. The dragon's great head drooped, its coils loosened, and Jason reached forward, his fingers brushing against gold. The fleece was his, and as they ran for the Argo, the city behind them erupted in flames. Aeetes had discovered their treachery, and he would not let them go unpunished. The Argo set sail, the oars cutting through the black waters, but behind them the ships of Colchis followed, relentless. And so Medea, daughter of Aeetes, priestess of the gods, made a terrible choice. Her brother Apsyrtus had come with the fleet. and in the dead of night she took his life. She cut him into pieces and cast them into the sea. A horror beyond imagining, for she knew her father, and she knew he would stop to gather his son's remains. And so, as Aeetes wept, the Argo disappeared into the horizon. But Jason had gained more than the fleece. He had gained a woman bound by darkness, and his fate was no longer his own. The gods did not let them leave easily. They faced the deadly sirens whose voices lured sailors to their doom. But Orpheus played his lyre, drowning out their song. They sailed past the bronze giant Talos, a monstrous guardian of Crete, and Medea brought him down with a single spell, whispering madness into his metal heart, trial after trial. But at last, they returned to Iolcus. The journey was done. The fleece was theirs. Jason had won, or so he thought, but the gods had not finished with him yet. There are heroes who find glory, and there are heroes who lose everything. Jason had sailed beyond the edge of the world. He had won the golden fleece. He had returned to claim his throne, but his story did not end in triumph, for the gods had not forgotten him, and neither had Medea. This is the tale of a man who defied the will of the heavens, a love that turned to vengeance, a throne won and lost. This is the fall of Jason. Jason had done the impossible. He had returned home with the golden fleece, the prize that was meant to restore him as rightful king of Iolcus. The people whispered his name in awe. The Argonauts stood beside him, and yet, when he entered the palace of Peleus, the usurper who had stolen his father's throne, there was no welcome, no surrender, only a cold, mocking smile. "You have the fleece," Peleus said, "but I still have the crown." Jason's fingers curled into fists. He had faced monsters, he had faced gods, but he had not yet faced the cruelty of men. And Peleus would not yield without blood. But Jason did not strike, for there was another in the shadows, watching, waiting, Medea. Medea had not forgotten what Jason had promised her, a home, a kingdom, a life at his side, and she had not forgotten what Peleus had done. The man who had stolen Jason's birthright, the man who had sent him to die. So she stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk, and she whispered lies into the ears of Peleus' daughters. "I can make your father young again," she said, "a gift of the gods." She took an old ram, she slit its throat, she cast it into a cauldron of boiling water, mixed with herbs known only to her, and from the steam, a lamb leapt forth, strong, healthy, reborn. The daughters of Peleus gasped. They believed. That night they crept into their father's chamber, knives in hand, love and desperation warring in their hearts. They killed him, and brought his body to Medea. "Now," they said, "bring him back." Medea only smiled. She left them with their grief, and walked away. Peleus was dead, but Jason's throne was still lost, for the people of Iolcus, horrified by what had been done, refused to accept him as king. And so Jason and Medea fled, exiles, bound together by fate, but not for long. Jason and Medea found refuge in Corinth, a city of power, of wealth, of opportunity. There they built a life, there they had children, and for a time Jason forgot the gods. He forgot the sea, the fleece, the blood that had paved his path. He was not a hero, not a king, just a man, but men are not meant to escape their fates, and Jason was still bound to the will of Olympus, and so the choice was set before him. King Creon of Corinth had a daughter, Glauce, beautiful, innocent, a princess of power, and he saw in Jason more than just a man. He saw a ruler, a husband for his daughter, a future king, and so he made Jason an offer. "Leave Medea," Creon said, "marry Glauce, rule Corinth, take the life you deserve." Jason hesitated. He had sworn himself to Medea. She had saved him, had killed for him, had left her home, her family, her gods, for him. But Jason was tired of exile, tired of running, and he was a man, not a god, so he made his choice. He abandoned Medea, for a throne, for a kingdom, for another woman, and in doing so, he sealed his fate. Betrayal is a wound that does not heal, and Medea had been betrayed before, by her father, by her brother whose blood she had spilled, by the gods who had made her love a man who had cast her aside. But this betrayal, this was the deepest wound of all. She did not weep, she did not beg, she only whispered, a spell, a curse, a final act of vengeance. On the day of Jason's wedding, a messenger came to the palace. Medea had sent a gift, a gown, a golden crown. Glaus, innocent and unaware, took them with delight. She placed the crown upon her head. The fabric of the gown clung to her skin. And then, fire. It did not burn as mortal flames do. It did not spread. It did not flicker. It consumed only her. Her screams filled the halls as the flesh melted from her bones, as the golden crown seared into her skull, and Creon, her father, rushing to save her, caught in the blaze, died at her feet. Jason ran, horror in his eyes, rage in his veins, but the worst had yet to come, for Medea's vengeance was not yet complete. Jason had taken from her the life she had built, so Medea would take from him the only thing he had left, their sons, the children they had made together, their blood, his legacy. Some say she hesitated, some say she wept, but the gods were watching, and the gods do not change their will. She killed them, her own children, Jason's sons. She took their lives before he could reach them, before he could beg, before he could fall to his knees and undo the choice he had made. And then she left, not on foot, not by sea, but upon a chariot drawn by dragons, gifted to her by the gods, disappearing into the sky, leaving Jason with nothing but ashes and loss. His throne gone, his wife dead, his children murdered, his past a ghost that would never stop whispering his name. Jason did not rebuild. He did not seek revenge. He did not rage against the gods. He simply withered. A man once bound for greatness, now a ghost of himself. He wandered the streets of Corinth, alone, unwanted, until one day he returned to the place where it all began, the Argo, his ship, the vessel that had carried him to glory, now rotting on the shore, abandoned like the hero it had once borne. Jason sat beneath its broken mast. Perhaps he thought of the sea, perhaps he thought of Medea, perhaps he thought of the life he had lost. And then the mast, the very heart of the ship, splintered and fell. It crushed him where he sat, and so Jason, the man who had once defied gods, monsters, and fate, died, not in battle, not in legend, but forgotten. His name remembered not for his triumphs, but for his failures. Not all heroes are meant to be kings, not all love stories end in light, and some legends are warnings. Jason sought a throne, but all he found was ruin, and so his story remains, not as a tale of victory, but as a lesson, that glory fades, that betrayal costs, and that the gods do not forget. This is the story of Atalanta, a girl abandoned at birth, raised by the wild, stronger than any man who dared to challenge her, a warrior, a huntress, a woman who outran fate itself, until the day she could not, for no matter how swift we run, destiny is always waiting. And love is the one race we never truly win. Her story begins not with a blessing, but with a curse. A child was born to a king of Arcadia, but she was not what he had hoped for. She was not a son, and so, with a heart colder than the mountain winds, he ordered the infant cast away, left upon the slopes of Parthenium, where the gods alone would decide her fate. No cradle, no shelter, only the endless sky above her and the hunger of the beasts around her. But Atalanta was not meant to die, not yet, for Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was watching, and the wild does not forsake its own. A she-bear found the girl, took her in, nursed her as one of her own cubs, and when she grew strong enough, the wolves, the deer, the eagles of the mountains, all became her family. She did not need the world of men. She had the forest, and she was free. Years passed, and the girl became a warrior of the wild. Her feet knew no hesitation. Her hands never missed their mark. She ran faster than the deer, her arrows swifter than the falcon's dive. No man could best her. No beast could defy her. And so, when she took up the bow of Artemis, when she swore herself to the goddess of the hunt, she asked for only one thing, that she would never be forced to marry, that no man would ever claim her, for she had seen the world of men, and she wanted none of it. But the gods do not grant wishes so easily, and fate does not change its course, no matter how fast you run. Far beyond the forests of Arcadia, a curse had fallen upon the land of Calydon. A monstrous boar, sent by Artemis herself to punish a king's arrogance, ravaged the countryside, its tusks as long as a man's arm, its hide too thick for any blade, its rage unending. No warrior could stop it, and so the call for heroes went out. The greatest men of Greece answered, Theseus, Peleus, Meleager, and among them a woman, Atalanta. At first the men scoffed, they laughed. What use was a woman in a hunt meant for warriors? But when the boar came, when it charged like a storm, its tusks goring one man after another, it was not Theseus, not Peleus, not the sons of gods or the kings of men. It was Atalanta who struck first. Her arrow pierced the beast's side, cutting through the thickest hide. The men watched in stunned silence, and when the boar finally fell, when the battle was won, Meleager, prince of Calydon, rose before the others and laid the boar's hide at Atalanta's feet. She had bested them all. She had proven herself, and Meleager, looking upon her, saw not just a warrior, but a woman he loved. But love is not so simple, and fate is never kind. Meleager's uncles, furious that a woman had been given the prize of the hunt, sought to take the boar's hide from her. They mocked her. They called her unworthy. Meleager, blinded by rage, killed them where they stood. But his fate had already been decided long before, for when he was a child the fates had appeared to his mother, Althea, and revealed a prophecy. Meleager's life would end the moment a certain log, burning in the hearth, was turned to ash. His mother had hidden it away, locked it from the flames, but now, she cursed her son. She took the log, she cast it into the fire, and as it burned to cinders, Meleager fell, gone. Atalanta, who had never wanted love, who had never wished for a man's touch, was left alone once more, and so she ran from grief, back to the wild, back to the freedom of the hunt. But fate was still chasing her, and this time she could not outrun it. Word of Atalanta's beauty and strength had spread across Greece. Kings, warriors, even gods sought her hand. But she had made a vow. She would not be owned. She would never belong to a man. So she issued a challenge. I will marry only the man who can outrun me. But if he fails, he will die. And so the suitors came. One by one they raced her, and one by one they fell. For no man was swifter than Atalanta. Their feet pounded the earth. Their breath came in ragged gasps. But she was the wind itself, and one by one they perished, until Hippomenes stepped forward. He was no great warrior, no son of gods, but he was clever, and he had prayed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She had given him 3 golden apples, gifts from the gardens of the Hesperides, and as the race began, as Atalanta surged ahead, Hippomenes cast the first apple before her. It gleamed like the sun, and for the first time, Atalanta hesitated. She slowed, just enough. He threw the second, then the third, and as she reached for it, he crossed the finish line. She had lost. For the first time, she had lost. And the vow she had made, the promise she had sworn, bound her. She became Hippomenes' wife, but the gods had not yet finished with her. Hippomenes had won, but he had forgotten to thank Aphrodite, and the goddess of love does not take insult lightly. Blinded by passion, Hippomenes took Atalanta into the sacred temple of Cybele, where no mortal was meant to lie, and there they angered the gods. Cybele's punishment was swift. Their bodies twisted, their voices vanished, flesh turned to fur, hands to claws, and when it was over, they were no longer man and woman. They were lions, bound to the chariot of Cybele for eternity, never to run freely again, never to race again, never to love as they once had, only to pull the goddess's chariot, forever. Atalanta was the swiftest of all. She outran men, she outran beasts, she outran fate itself. But no one can outrun the will of the gods, And so her story remains, a tale of freedom, of defiance, of love gained and love lost, and a lesson that echoes through time. No matter how fast we run, destiny always finds us in the end. Some chase love until their feet can run no more. Some drown in their own reflection, lost in a dream of themselves. This is the story of Echo, a nymph cursed to speak only the words of others, and Narcissus, a man who could love no one but himself. A tale of longing and vanity, a tale of voices that fade into the wind, and a love that could never be returned. Echo was a nymph of the forests, a daughter of the earth, her laughter as bright as the rustling leaves, her voice as sweet as the song of birds. She was beloved by Artemis, swift and free, her feet knowing only the paths of the wild. But Echo had one flaw. She loved the sound of her own voice. She spoke endlessly, weaving words like music, filling the air with stories that never ended. And though the other nymphs smiled, though the world listened, one goddess did not. Hera, the queen of Olympus, the wife of Zeus, the goddess of vengeance. She saw Echo not as a songbird, not as a storyteller, but as a deceiver. For Echo, with her endless words, had distracted Hera many times, allowing Zeus to slip away to chase his mortal desires. And Hera did not forget. She did not forgive. And so one day she cursed Echo. "You love your voice," Hera said. "Then you shall have none of your own. From this day forward you may only repeat what others have spoken. Nothing more, nothing less." Echo tried to cry out, to plead, but her own words were lost to her, and from that moment she wandered the woods, unheard, unseen, a ghost of the voice she once had. But fate was not yet done with her, for soon she would see him, and she would love him, and he would not love her at all. Far from the whispers of Echo's sorrow, there was a boy, a prince, a hunter, a figure of such beauty that the world stopped to gaze upon him. Narcissus. His face was the work of the gods, his golden curls kissed by the sun, his eyes deep as the sky itself. Men and women alike longed for him, called to him, offered him their hearts, but Narcissus was empty of love. He cared for no one but himself. He would walk through the forests, through the rivers, past the yearning hearts that ached for his touch, and he would not turn. He would not see them, for he believed none were worthy of him. And so he left behind a trail of broken souls, lovers who called to him, begged for him, wept for him, but he never looked back, until one day he wandered into the forest, and there, hidden among the trees, Echo was watching. She had seen him before, had heard the whispers of his beauty, but now, standing before him, she knew. She loved. Her heart beat like a bird trapped in a cage. Her hands trembled. She wanted to call out, to speak his name, to tell him that she would love him more than any other. But when she opened her mouth, she had no words of her own. Narcissus walked through the trees, his golden form shining through the shadows, and called out, "Is anyone here?" An Echo, helpless, desperate, could only repeat, "Here, here." He frowned. "Come to me," he said. "Come to me, to me." Her hands reached forward, her steps careful, her heart ready to burst from her chest. At last, he would see her. But when she stepped into the light, he saw only a stranger, a girl, a nymph, a thing unworthy of his love. He recoiled. "Go away," he said, and Echo, unable to speak anything else, whispered back, "Go away, go away." But her feet did not move. Her heart would not let her leave. So she ran to him, threw her arms around him. But Narcissus, who had never loved another, shoved her aside. "Do not touch me," he spat, and the words came back to him, trembling, aching. "Touch me, touch me." But he did not, and he never would, for he did not love her. And so Echo, shamed, broken, her love turned to dust, fled into the woods, and she was never seen again. Only her voice remained, an echo repeating the words of others, fading into silence, forever unheard. But the gods had seen, and one among them did not forget. Nemesis, the goddess of justice, of balance, of retribution. She had watched Narcissus scorn those who loved him, turn away those who would have given him the world, and she knew that pride must be punished. So she whispered a curse upon the wind, a fate that would take from Narcissus everything he had ever been, and soon the trap was set. One day, wandering through the woods, Narcissus grew thirsty. He came upon a pool of water clear as polished glass. He bent down to drink, and then he saw himself, the face of a god, the beauty of the heavens, eyes like the sky, hair like golden fire, and for the first time in his life, he felt love, deep, overwhelming, crushing. He did not move, he did not drink, he did not blink, he only stared, reaching for the one before him, but when his fingers touched the surface of the water, the image vanished. Panicked, he pulled back, and there, the vision returned. He did not understand, he did not know that he had fallen in love with his own reflection, and that love would never be returned. Day after day, he remained. He did not eat, he did not drink, he only gazed and wasted away. The flowers bloomed and withered, the sun rose and fell, but still he did not move, and when, at last, his body collapsed upon the earth, his final breath escaping into the wind, all that remained was a flower, small, pale, bowed toward the water, a Narcissus, and so the man who had loved no one but himself became nothing but a memory. Echo faded into the wind. Narcissus faded into the earth, both lost to love, one who loved too much and one who never loved at all. But their stories remain. When voices call out in empty places, when the wind carries words with no speaker, Echo is still there. And when spring comes, when the small white flowers bend toward the water, Narcissus still lingers, forever gazing, forever lost. Before the world had names, before the first man drew breath, before the gods rose to their thrones upon Olympus, they were there, 3 sisters, older than time, stronger than the heavens. They do not rule with swords or scepters, they do not command with voices of thunder, and yet they shape the destiny of all who walk the earth. This is the story of the Moirai, the 3 sisters of fate, the weavers of past, present, and future, the hands that spin, measure, and cut the thread of every life. Even the gods themselves bow before their will. Far beyond the reach of men and gods alike, there exists a place beyond time, a land where the stars do not change, where the sun never rises, where the past, the present, and the future are one. And within this eternal twilight, there stands a great loom. It hums with the whispers of every life, from the first child's cry to the final breath of kings. Here in the choir of the cosmos, 3 figures work in silence. The sisters, the Moirai, the Fates, and in their hands lies the destiny of all things. The first sister is Clotho, the spinner, the beginning. She holds a distaff of gold, and from its tip she draws the first thread of every mortal life. With careful hands, she spins the essence of a soul into being, weaving it from the void, watching as it takes form. A child is born, and Clotho spins. Her hands do not tremble, her thread does not break, for life itself begins at her touch, and so long as the thread remains uncut, the mortal endures. But she does not work alone, for once the thread is spun, another must decide its length. The second sister is Lachesis, the measurer, the weaver of destiny. In her hands she holds the staff of fate, its notches carved with the destinies of all who have lived, all who will ever be. She takes the thread from Clotho's hands, and she measures. A child's thread is long, for they will live many years. A soldier's thread is short, for battle will take him before his time. A king's thread is golden, but that does not mean it will not fray. She does not change the pattern, she does not alter the weave. She simply measures, and what is measured cannot be undone. But the thread is not hers to keep, for the final sister, the most feared of all, waits with open hands. The last sister is Atropos, the cutter, the end. She does not spin, she does not measure, she only cuts. In her grasp is the shears of fate, sharp enough to sever time itself. She watches as the threads of life are spun, measured, stretched across the loom of eternity. She waits, silent, patient, and when the moment comes, she lifts the shears. A king's thread snaps, and his kingdom falls. A hero's thread is cut, and the world mourns his passing. A child's thread ends before it has truly begun, and grief fills the earth. But Atropos does not weep. She does not falter, for it is not cruelty that guides her hand, only necessity. For all things must end, even the gods, even the stars, even time itself. It is said that Zeus, king of the gods, fears only three things: the wrath of the Titans, the rise of his own sons, and the will of the fates, for even he, mighty, immortal, unshaken, cannot escape their design. When the gods waged war against the Titans, the Moirai wove the battle into their tapestry. When Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece, was born, it was the Moirai who decreed his short and glorious life. When Oedipus heard the prophecy that he would kill his father, it was the Moirai who had already spun his fate. No one, no mortal, no king, no god, can change the path they have woven, and those who try only bring about their own destruction. For fate is not kind, fate is not cruel, fate simply is. Even now, the sisters weave. They work without rest, without mercy, without hesitation. Threads are spun, threads are measured, threads are cut, and the loom of the cosmos continues to hum, whispering the stories of all who have ever been, and all who are yet to come. Some fear the Moirai, some curse them, some beg for their favor, but in the end, none escape them, none change what has already been spun. For the fates are older than time, and they will remain when all else is gone. No man can outrun his destiny, no god can rewrite what has been woven, and no soul can escape the shears of Atropos. We are all threads upon the loom, some short, some long, some bright, some dark, but all are cut in the end. And so when you look upon the stars, when you whisper to the heavens, when you wonder what lies ahead, know this: the Moirai have already decided, and the thread of your life is already in their hands. This is the tale of Eros and Psyche, the god of love, the woman whose beauty rivaled the gods, a love hidden in darkness, tested by doubt, torn apart by betrayal, and redeemed by the power of the heart itself. For love, true love, is not without trials, but those who endure find eternity. In a kingdom lost to time there lived a princess named Psyche. Her face was fairer than the dawn, her form more perfect than any sculpture carved by mortal hands. Men and women alike worshipped her beauty, knelt before her as if she were a goddess. But the gods do not suffer mortals to steal their devotion, and one among them, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, watched with jealous eyes. Temples once built in her honor stood empty. Prayers once whispered to the heavens spoke only Psyche's name. And so the goddess swore vengeance. She called for her son, Eros, the god of desire, whose arrows could make gods and mortals alike fall helplessly in love. "Go to this girl," Aphrodite commanded. "Make her fall in love with a monster, one that will bring her nothing but sorrow." Eros took his golden bow, his silver arrows, and descended to the mortal world. But fate had plans of its own. Eros found Psyche sleeping beneath the silver glow of the moon. She was radiant, innocent, untouched by the cruelty of the world. He raised his bow, drew the string, but, as he did, a single drop of oil from his torch fell upon her skin. She stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, Eros saw her, not as a mortal, not as a rival to the gods, but as a soul he could not harm. His heart, the heart of the god of love itself, was pierced by his own arrow. He did not curse her, he did not bring her ruin. Instead, he vanished, and Psyche awoke, never knowing how close she had come to her fate, never knowing that love itself had already chosen her. But Aphrodite's wrath was not so easily undone. Though all admired Psyche, though kings and princes sang her praises, none dared to love her. Her sisters were given husbands, golden palaces, lives of comfort. But Psyche remained alone. It was as if love itself had turned away from her. And so, desperate for answers, her father sought the oracle of Apollo, and the god's words were grim. Your daughter will never wed a mortal. She is destined to marry a creature feared by gods and men alike. Take her to the mountaintop. There, her husband will come for her. Psyche stood silent. She did not weep. She did not fight. If this was the will of the gods, she would meet her fate without fear. And so, dressed as a bride for a wedding she did not understand, she ascended the mountain, waiting for the monster that would claim her. But when the wind rose, when the heavens shifted, it was not a beast that carried her away. It was the whispering hands of Zephyrus, the west wind, and she was taken to paradise. When Psyche awoke, she found herself in a palace unlike any in the world, walls of gold, jewels that shimmered like stars, a home made not for mortals, but for gods. And then, a voice, deep, gentle, a lover unseen, her husband. But there was one condition. She could have everything, love, comfort, pleasure beyond imagining, but she must never look upon him, never light a lamp, never see his face. Psyche, though fearful, agreed, and in the dark he came to her. He spoke words sweeter than honey, held her with hands that made her soul tremble, and though she did not know his face, she knew love, for the first time, for the last time, for doubt would destroy them both. Time passed, and Psyche's heart grew restless. Her sisters, jealous of her fortune, filled her mind with whispers. How do you know he is not a monster? They asked. What if he hides himself because he is something terrible? That night, as her lover slept beside her, Psyche took a lamp in trembling hands. She lifted it, let the light fall across his face, and gasped, for there was no monster, only Eros. His beauty was beyond words, his wings folded like shadow and moonlight. And Psyche had betrayed him. A single drop of oil fell from the lamp, burning his skin. Eros stirred, saw her, and his face filled with sorrow. You have broken my trust, he said, and then he was gone. Psyche wandered the world, searching for her lost love, but the gods do not forgive easily. Aphrodite, still wrathful, set 4 impossible tasks before her, each meant to break her, each meant to destroy her, but Psyche endured. She sorted a mountain of seeds in a single night, helped by the unseen hands of ants. She fetched golden wool from the deadly rams of the sun, guided by a whispering reed. She filled a flask with water from the blackened river of the underworld, aided by an eagle's flight, and at last she was sent to retrieve beauty from the underworld itself. She descended into Hades' realm, carrying a box meant to hold the beauty of Persephone. But when she returned, temptation struck. She opened the box and found not beauty, but sleep itself. She collapsed, and all seemed lost, until love came for her. Eros had watched her, had seen her suffer, had seen her prove herself, and when she fell, he caught her. He woke her with a kiss. He carried her to Olympus, and before the throne of Zeus he made his plea. Let her be one of us, he said. Let her be immortal. And Zeus, smiling, agreed. A goblet of ambrosia was placed in Psyche's hands. She drank, and in that moment she became a goddess, the goddess of the soul, and at last she and Eros were one. For eternity, love is not without trials, but love that endures, that suffers and rises again, is love that never dies. Some gifts bring fortune, some bring ruin, and some are forged with a curse that does not fade. This is the story of the necklace of Harmonia, a jewel of unmatched beauty, a gift given in love, but born from hatred, a curse passed from queen to queen, from mother to daughter, from generation to generation. For fate does not forget, and the price of betrayal is never paid in full. The halls of Olympus were filled with music and laughter. Aphrodite, goddess of love, had been given in marriage, not to Ares, the one who set her blood on fire, not to Hermes, whose words were as smooth as honey, not to Apollo, who could sing her praises for eternity. No, She had been given to Hephaestus, the crippled god, the outcast, the one cast from Olympus at birth, broken and lame. But he was no fool, he was brilliant, he was skilled, the greatest smith in existence, and for this Zeus had chosen him, a husband who could build her palaces of gold, forge her jewels unlike any seen before, a husband who could give her wealth beyond imagining. But wealth was not what she wanted. Aphrodite was the goddess of desire, and her heart belonged to one who burned like fire, Ares, god of war, fierce, beautiful, a body carved from battle itself. When he moved, the earth shook. When he spoke, men died in his name. And when he looked at her, she melted. So they came together in secret, in the soft hours of the night, in chambers locked away from prying eyes, where his hands roamed her skin, where her lips whispered his name, where they forgot all else. Hephaestus was a maker of wonders, but he was not blind. He saw the whispers, he heard the laughter behind his back, and in his mind one thought echoed, "They think me a fool." Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, was born out of the affair. She was a being of perfect balance, love and war, peace and strife, and for that the gods loved her. But the gods do not marry their own daughters to mortals. Yet fate had already written her story. For Zeus had decreed that Harmonia would be wed to Cadmus, the mortal founder of Thebes, a man who had slain a sacred serpent, a man who had defied the gods, and though Cadmus was noble, though he was blessed by prophecy, though Thebes was to become a mighty kingdom, the gods did not forgive, and they would not let this marriage go unpunished. The wedding of Cadmus and Harmonia was a sight unlike any before. The gods themselves attended. Apollo played his lyre. Dionysus poured wine that never ran dry, and among the gifts of the immortals came a treasure of unmatched beauty, a necklace forged by Hephaestus, god of the forge, at the command of Aphrodite. It gleamed like the stars, crafted of gold, inlaid with gems that shone like the dawn, a piece so exquisite that even the gods admired it. And when it was placed around Harmonia's neck, she shone, her beauty beyond mortal comprehension. But what the gods give, they can also curse, and this necklace was not a blessing, it was vengeance, for Hephaestus had never forgotten Aphrodite's betrayal with Ares, and if he could not punish the goddess of love, he would punish her daughter instead. Harmonia knew nothing of the curse. She smiled as she wore it. Cadmus adored her, and Thebes flourished, for a time, but a curse is patient, and no one escapes the will of the gods. Years passed, Thebes prospered, but misfortune followed Cadmus and Harmonia wherever they went. One by one their children met tragedy. Their sons were slain in battle. Their daughters were driven to madness, a line destined to never know peace. And at last, Cadmus, weary of loss, weary of pain, weary of a life that had brought only suffering, turned to the heavens and cried out, "If the gods wish to punish me, then let them turn me into a serpent, like the one I once slew." And the gods listened. Before Harmonia's eyes, her husband's body twisted. His arms became scales, his legs withered into a long, coiling tail. He hissed, no longer a man, and in her grief she embraced him. And the gods, perhaps in mercy, perhaps in mockery, turned her into a serpent as well. Two great snakes, once rulers of Thebes, now cursed for eternity, and the necklace of Harmonia remained, waiting. For its curse was not yet finished. The necklace of Harmonia did not die with its first bearer. It was passed down, from mother to daughter, from queen to queen, and with each new owner, tragedy followed. First it adorned the throat of Semele, daughter of Cadmus, and she was burned alive by the very presence of Zeus, her lover. Then it passed to Jocasta, queen of Thebes, who would unknowingly marry her own son, Oedipus, and when the truth was revealed, she hanged herself in horror. The necklace, untouched, still gleaming, was taken by Arachne, a woman who betrayed her own husband for gold, and she was slain by her own son in vengeance. And so it went, one by one, the women who wore it, the queens who claimed it. Each met their doom, each paid the price, for the curse of the gods does not fade, and the beauty of the necklace was only a mask for the doom it carried. For generations the necklace moved through hands like a plague, until, at last, it came into the possession of Amphitryon, father of Heracles, and in time it was given to the oracle of Delphi, where the priests feared its power. They knew the stories, they knew the curse, and so they took the necklace and cast it into the depths of the sea, where the gods alone would decide its fate, and at last its curse was lost to time, or so they say, for some say it still lies in the depths, waiting, a jewel of beauty untouched by the years, a gift, a trap, and should it ever be found again, the curse will awaken, for the gods do not forgive, and their vengeance is eternal. Some treasures shine with beauty, some shine with power, and some shine with a curse that never fades. The necklace of Harmonia was a gift of love, but love stolen from the gods can never bring happiness. And so its story remains, a lesson, a warning, that the gifts of the heavens can be more dangerous than the wrath of hell itself. There are curses that fade with time, and then there are those that sink their teeth into bloodlines, passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, never ending, never forgiving. A house built not on stone, but on murder. A family bound not by love, but by vengeance. This is the story of the house of Atreus, a name carved into history, soaked in the blood of kin, and the Furies, the goddesses of vengeance, the whisperers of madness, the ones who wait in the darkness for justice that cannot be undone. For there are crimes too great for forgiveness, and for those crimes there is only wrath. Before there was Atreus, before there was Agamemnon, before the house of Atreus crumbled beneath its own bloodshed, there was Tantalus, a king, a son of Zeus, a man who walked among the gods. He had their favor, he had their trust, and he betrayed them. He stole the food of the gods, nectar and ambrosia, believing he could claim divinity for himself. And worse, he dared to test them. He laid a feast before them, a meal more terrible than any sin before it. His own son, Pelops, carved, cooked, served, to see if the gods could be fooled. They were not. For this crime, Tantalus was condemned to the deepest pit of Tartarus, where he would forever stand in a pool of water he could never drink, beneath fruit he could never reach. But the curse did not die with him. It seeped into his bloodline, and it would never let go. Pelops, restored by the gods, lived. He had sons, Atreus and Thyestes, and in them the curse festered. Two brothers bound by ambition, torn apart by betrayal. Thyestes seduced Atreus's wife, and Atreus did what his blood demanded. He invited his brother to a feast, a meal of reconciliation, a meal of horror, for the meat on Thyestes' plate was his own children, their blood on his hands, their bones in his mouth, and when he learned the truth, when Atreus revealed what he had done, the screams echoed through the halls. But the Furies did not come for Atreus, not yet, for the curse was not yet finished. It would pass to the next generation, and what was once a feud between brothers would become a war between sons. Atreus had sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. They would lead armies, they would rule kingdoms, and they would carry the curse with them. Agamemnon, mighty and proud, sailed to Troy, leaving behind his home, his throne, his wife, and to gain the gods' favor, he killed his daughter, Iphigenia, a child, a girl who ran to him with open arms, believing she was to be wed, only to feel the knife in her throat, a sacrifice to the winds, a price for war, and so Troy burned, but Agamemnon's true war was waiting for him at home. For Clytemnestra, his wife, did not forget. She did not forgive. And when he returned, when he stepped into his palace, when he thought himself victorious, she was waiting, with an axe. And as his blood poured onto the floor, as his screams faded into silence, the curse of the house of Atreus claimed another soul. But the Furies were still not done, because there was one more crime, one more act of vengeance, and one more name yet to be written in blood. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, the last heir of a house built on murder. He had seen his father's corpse, had heard the whispers in the dark. Avenge him, avenge the king, kill the traitor, Kill your mother. But what justice can there be when blood demands more blood? He hesitated, but the gods did not. Apollo, radiant and merciless, spoke to him in a voice that could not be denied. Strike, Orestes, or be damned yourself. And so, with shaking hands, he stepped forward. Clytemnestra turned. She did not beg. She did not plead. You are my son, she said. But the blade did not waver, and as she fell, as her life left her body, the Furies woke. They came like a storm, like the night itself, not goddesses, not mortals, something older, something darker, the Erinyes, the Furies, born from the blood of the first crime, the first betrayal, the first murder. They existed for one thing, to punish, to hunt those who spilled the blood of kin. And Orestes had killed his own mother. He ran, through the halls, through the city, through the world itself. But the Furies do not rest. They do not sleep. They do not stop. Their whispers turned to screams. His mind unraveled. His soul burned. And he knew, no matter how far he fled, there would be no escape until, at last, he turned to the gods, to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the only one who could end the cycle. In the sacred halls of Athens, beneath the eyes of mortals and gods alike, Orestes stood trial. The first judgment of man by gods. The Furies hissed, their voices filled with the weight of all who had ever been wronged. He has spilled the blood of his mother, they cried. He must pay. But Apollo stood beside him. He avenged his father, the god said. He has done as fate commanded. And so Athena, wise, just, unshaken, listened. She weighed the crime, weighed the curse, weighed the endless cycle of blood, and she made her choice. Orestes is free, she said, and the Furies, who had never been denied, who had never been silenced, were silenced. They did not vanish, they did not die, but they changed, no longer spirits of blind vengeance, but goddesses of justice, and the house of Atreus, the house of blood, the house of betrayal, was finally free. But the echoes of the past do not fade easily. The name Atreus is still spoken in whispers. The Furies still wait in the dark, watching. And justice, true justice, is never simple. For what is vengeance if not justice taken too far? And what is justice if not the end of vengeance? This was the story of a house that bled itself dry, a curse that swallowed generations, and a god who finally said, no more. There are cities built by kings, there are cities forged by conquest, but few are claimed by the gods themselves. This is the story of Athens, a city of knowledge, a city of power, a city whose name echoes through history. But its birth was a battle not of armies, but of gods, for the greatest city of Greece would not be given. It would be won by wisdom, by war, by a choice that would shape the world forever. This is the tale of how Athens was named, and how two mighty gods fought for its claim. Long ago, before Athens stood proud upon its hills, before the Parthenon touched the sky, the land was wild and untamed. The people who lived there were strong, brave, but they had no patron, no god to protect them. And so they prayed. They called to Olympus, asking for a divine ruler to guide them, to bless their land, to make them great. And the gods listened. Two answered. Two stood before the people, their power shining like the sun. The first, Poseidon, god of the sea, mighty, fierce. The earth shook beneath his feet, the sky darkened at his presence. A god of storms, of ships, of warriors who ruled the waves. The second, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, bright-eyed, cunning. She stood with the grace of a warrior, the mind of a ruler, a goddess of strategy, of knowledge, of a city that would last forever. And they both spoke as one. This land shall be mine. The people trembled, for to refuse a god was madness, but to choose between them, that was impossible. And so a challenge was made. Each god would give a gift to the land, a gift to the people, and the people would decide. Poseidon stepped forward first. His voice was thunder, his gaze like a storm upon the ocean. He raised his mighty trident, struck the earth with all his strength. and from the ground a great spring erupted. Water poured forth, rushing, powerful, endless. The people gasped. They had never seen such a wonder. Poseidon smiled. "For you," he said, "I give the sea itself. With these waters your ships shall rule the waves. You will be mighty, feared by all who face you. You will be warriors. You will be conquerors. You will take what is yours." The people cheered, but then they bent down. They cupped the water in their hands. They drank and gagged. It was salt water, bitter, useless to drink, useless to grow crops, a gift of power, but not of life. And now the people turned to Athena to see what she would give. Athena stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not strike the ground in rage. She only lifted her hand, and from the earth a single tree began to grow. It rose slow and steady, its branches stretching toward the sky, its leaves shimmering silver in the light. An olive tree, small, simple, but full of promise. Athena spoke. "I give you a gift not of war, but of wisdom. This tree will give you fruit to eat. Its oil will give you light in the darkness. Its wood will build your homes and temples. With this you will flourish, not as conquerors, but as thinkers, builders, philosophers. Yours will be a city not of destruction, but of greatness that never fades." The people looked upon the tree. They touched its branches, tasted its fruit, and in their hearts they knew. They had chosen their god. Poseidon watched, and rage filled his heart. A god of storms, a god of pride, and he had lost. With a roar like crashing waves, he raised his trident once more. The sky darkened, the wind howled, the sea rose in a fury, crashing against the land, trying to wash away their choice. But Athena stood firm. With a single step she touched the earth, and the storm halted. The sea retreated. Poseidon's wrath was denied, and the people knew they had chosen well. The city was built beneath the watchful gaze of Athena, a city of wisdom and strength, a city of philosophers and warriors, a city that would one day give the world its greatest minds. Plato, Socrates, Pericles, their names would echo through history, just as Athena had promised, and in her honor the people gave the city her name. Athens, the city of wisdom, power, and unyielding spirit, the city of Athena, and from that day forward she would be their protector, their guardian, the goddess who had won them not with force, but with wisdom. Power fades, conquest dies, but wisdom endures. Athens was not built on war, not on violence, but on knowledge, art, and reason. And for that, it became the greatest city in the world.